Chapter 119. Boss, are you wondering why I directly agreed to let the little girl from the Clive family come to our manor? Ai Dehua said to Jiang Hai as he got in the car, started the engine, and drove out. In fact, just now, he saw that Jiang Hai was puzzled, but he didn't say it clearly. Now he can tell Jiang Hai. Why? Seeing that Edward Anderson was willing to talk, Jiang Hai couldn't help but look at him. Speaking of which, although they have only been together for a few months, Jiang Hai still trusts the people in his manor. Especially for the two people, Robbins and Ai Dehua, who he personally appointed to manage the other cowboys and fishermen. Jiang Hai came to the United States for the first time. If he didn't have a few confidants around him, it would be really difficult. These two old men are Jiang Hai's confidants. It is precisely because of this that Jiang Hai didn't ask directly just now. It seems that boss doesn't care much about the recent news. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Edward Anderson smiled and talked to Jiang Hai while driving. Don't you know that Boston was hit by a snow disaster this year? Looking at Jiang Hai, Edward Anderson said with a puzzled look. I know this. I heard that the businessmen in the city also made a fortune because of this. As for what Ai Dehua said, Jiang Hai had also seen it in the news. Because Boston was located near the Atlantic Ocean, it was rainy in summer and snowy in winter. This year's winter was the same. The amount of snow in Boston broke the limit of previous years, causing a lot of impact on traffic and so on. From the beginning of the snow in November until now, Boston's snowstorm warning had not been lifted. But for Jiang Hai, a snow disaster is nothing. First, his house is very strong. Second, when it snows, they will always clean up, although the snow on the roadside has accumulated to almost 1.5 meters. However, for Jiang Hai's normal life, the snow disaster did not cause any problems for him. Oh, that's in the urban area of Boston. Winthrop is not so lucky. Several classrooms and gymnasiums in the town's elementary school were crushed by the snow this year. The mayor and the principal of the town's elementary school have been collecting donations for the town's elementary school in recent days, but the effect is not very good. School will start in 10 days, and they may be the most anxious now. Edward Anderson shrugged and said slowly after hearing Jiang Hai's words. Jiang Hai seemed to have heard about this news a few days ago, but he forgot about it in the blink of an eye. For a commoner like him, his previous life was to clean the snow in front of his own door and not ask about the frost on the roof of other people's roof. After coming to the United States, he was the same. As long as he was happy, he couldn't be bothered to care about other people and things as long as they cared about him. When it collapsed, it was about the middle of December. Fortunately, the school was already on holiday at that time, so only a few rooms collapsed and there were no casualties. However, for the people in the town, this was not good news. In fact, when it comes to donations, the people of the United States are more generous and active than the people of other countries. Of course, in addition to the problem of the people's hearts, it is also related to the policies of the United States. Donations can be deducted from taxes. And the amount of deduction is very high. Sometimes, $1 can be deducted from $1.15 in taxes. It is precisely because of this that many rich people in the United States have the reputation of being philanthropists. Because not only can this help them become famous and spread the awareness of kindness, but it can also give them enough financial compensation. Logically speaking, there are many rich people in Boston, but these rich people don't need to care about the elementary school in Winthrop. In fact, there are not many rich people in Winthrop. Moreover, the current economic situation is not very good. Just by relying on these ordinary townspeople, $1 and $2 per person, they can only get a few $1,000s in total. They can't even build a classroom, let alone a gymnasium. From this, it can be seen that the people of the United States are conflicted. It is easy for Jiang Hai to say this. When he was in elementary school, the elementary school was very old. During the winter, there was no heating, and the windows were broken. They used plastic sheets to cover the winter. It was not until he was in 3rd grade that the school was renovated. After the school was renovated, they changed the heating and new glass. But even so, every winter, the students still need to use cloth strips and paste from home to cover the cracks of the windows. It was only when he was in junior high school that the windows were made of plastic steel. So, for Jiang Hai, it is nothing to suffer a little in school. But it seems that the people of the United States do not think this way. No matter how hard it is, they can't let the children suffer. This is their education policy. If they want to build something, they will build the best. In the United States, there is no such thing as making do. Then why did you ask her to come here now? Do you want me to donate? Hearing Edward Anderson's words, Jiang Hai nodded and asked strangely. He roughly understood what Ai Dehua meant. He should want him to donate. Whether to donate or not, and how much to donate, it is actually up to you, boss. But if you don't even give them a chance to persuade you, it will cause a certain blow to your reputation in the town. To be honest, boss, your reputation in the town is not very good now. Ai Dehua shrugged and said to Jiang Hai. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai couldn't help but be stunned for a moment. Then, he laughed self-deprecatingly. It seems like this is the case. Other rich people, after arriving at a place, would benefit the village. However, Jiang Hai didn't seem to have such a practice. Usually, he stays in his manor and has no communication with the people in the town. The only communication he had was when he sent more than a dozen bastards in the town to prison and almost destroyed the police station. Although this matter cannot be blamed on Jiang Hai, it is still not enough to make the residents of the town like Jiang Hai. No matter where to invest, it is very important to have a good relationship with the locals. Even in China, some bosses who go to the countryside to build factories need to have a good relationship with the people in the village. Otherwise, it is not a good thing to come and make trouble every 2 or 3 days. What's more, Jiang Hai is still in the United States. Since Jiang Hai came, it seems that for the people of Winthrop, Jiang Hai has not done a good thing. As for the tax on the manor, it is the money collected by the government. It has nothing to do with them. In addition, Jiang Hai's way of doing things is indeed a little bad. This also makes it difficult for Robbins, Ai Dehua, and the others to be sandwiched between Jiang Hai and the residents. But fortunately, although Jiang Hai has not done anything good, he has not done anything bad either. If the maximum favorability value is 100, then Jiang Hai's relationship with the town's residents is 49. It is basically still in a neutral state. There are only a few negative reactions. These negative reactions also came from the families of the bastards who were sent to prison by him. You mean, I should do something to change my impression among the town's residents? After thinking for a while, Jiang Hai said to Edward Anderson. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Ai Dehua shrugged. He was just giving an opinion. What to do is still up to Jiang Hai. Of course, if Jiang Hai wants to fight to the end, maybe they will still stand on Jiang Hai's side. But if they really wait until Jiang Hai and the town's residents are like fire and water, they may choose to side with their families and hometown. At least Jiang Hai is not very confident in his personal charm. Okay, let's wait and see. After thinking about it for a while, Jiang Hai realized that the cost of building a few classrooms wasn't a big deal. The cost of building a classroom was only about $10,000 in the US. A few classrooms and a basketball court wouldn't cost more than $100,000. However, Jiang Hai's current mindset was still the same as before. Let alone $100,000, even if it is only $10, he is not willing to give it to others for no reason. He is also not comfortable. What is his is. Even if he doesn't want it or destroys it, it is still his. No one is allowed to take it away. But if the money is to build a good relationship with the town's residents, to leave a good impression on the government, and most importantly, to offset part of the taxes, then Jiang Hai seems to be willing to give it up. Jiang Hai, who has been thinking about this matter, returned home not long after. The next day, after walking Jiang Hai's dog and checking on his horse, he and Ai Dehua drove to town together. Today was the day to sign the contract with the fisherman, and Jiang Hai himself had already made up his mind last night. So today, he didn't come here in AI Dehua's car. Instead, he drove his F650 into town. "Hi, boss." In front of the town's lawyer's office, Jiang Hai saw a row of cars parked there. When Jiang Hai and AI Dehua's car drove over, the people in these cars jumped out. One or two people looked at Jiang Hai. Needless to say, these people are the fishermen that Jiang Hai saw yesterday. In addition to them, there are also their families. Jiang Hai said that their families can also live in the manor. This is a benefit. Fishermen spend a lot of time at sea all year round, but compared to cowboys, their income is really high. It is even not less than white-collar workers who work in companies. In this world, although money is not omnipotent, it is absolutely impossible to do without money. With money, they also have a relatively stable family. Unlike Robbins and the others, except for Philip, who used to be a sailor, who had a wife, the others were either single or divorced. These crew members brought their wives with them. Even if they had children, they would be too embarrassed to bring them along. Today's second update, continuously delivered. Chapter 120. "Hey, you've been waiting for a long time." Getting out of the car, Jiang Hai looked at the fisherman in front of him and said with a chuckle. Looking at the front of the parking lot, the tire marks on the snow have been blown away by the wind. It can be seen that they should have been here for a while. No, we just arrived." Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Andrew Christian immediately shook his head and said. Behind him, there was a woman who also looked like a Latin American. She may be younger than Andrew Christian. She should be his wife. In the chaotic South America, this was not a rare thing. Marrying him can get a resident status in the United States. If he didn't come to the United States early, even if he went back now, he would definitely be the hottest and most fragrant woman in the world. Women younger than her would be happy to throw themselves into his arms. "Hello, since you are all here, let's go sign the contract. You can go back and pack up in a while." Although the villa in the manor has not been lived in for a while, the basic things are there. You only need to bring some personal belongings there. I will ask AI Dehua to take you to familiarize yourself with the manor first. Seeing that there was a woman behind each of them, Jiang Hai nodded to them and then said to the four people standing there. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the few people here naturally didn't have anything to disagree with. They immediately nodded. Then, the few of them went upstairs together. The law firm in this small town actually had lawyers, but there were only a total of 3 people who actually had a lawyer's license. Moreover, they were all second-rate swordsmen who didn't have much ability and came here to waste their time. They may not even have memorized the Constitution of the United States. If anyone wants to sue them, they will really lose. This law firm had only 2 roles. First, when the court of the town began to hear cases, if there were no lawyers, they would go and make a guest appearance. Second, they would issue labor contracts for the employing units in the town. Labor contracts were basically the same. It said what Party A and Party B needed to do. The only thing that needed to be filled in was salary and some benefits. Jiang Hai had come here more than once to fill in the form. He was familiar with the process and quickly completed the procedures for the 4 people. Then the 4 people immediately drove back home to pack their things. As for AI Dehua, he went with them. Today, he deliberately drove the F750, not only for transportation, but also to help them carry some things. Compared with Robbins and the other bachelors, these guys who asked their families to take care of them always had a lot of luggage. The reference point was Philemon Turner, who had a lot of toys in his house. After these people left, Jiang Hai didn't return home. Instead, he drove to the town's primary school in the southeast of the town. Winthrop Town wasn't too big, but it wasn't too small either. Compared to Australia and Canada, the United States population of 300 million wasn't considered vast but sparsely populated. Of course, compared to China, it was quite vast but sparsely populated. Although it was located in the greater Boston area, it was basically in a peripheral state. The entire state of Massachusetts had a population of more than 6 million. The population concentrated in Boston, Cambridge, Newton, Quincy, Revere, and Chelsea had reached more than 3 million. Winthrop was a remote town that was only halfway to the airport. The permanent population was about 20,000 people, less than 30,000. In this small town, there was a university, 3 middle schools, and 3 primary schools. It could be seen that the density of schools was really good. Aside from the university, among the 3 middle schools and 3 primary schools, one of them was built by the town, which was the so-called national school. The other 2 were private. Compared to China, the public schools were better, and the private schools were worse. It was the opposite in the United States. Private schools were better, and public schools were worse. After all, the investment and corresponding groups of the 2 were not the same. In China, teachers were more willing to teach in public schools because it was a secure job. Even if the school couldn't make it, they could still go through the internal channels of the Education Bureau and continue teaching in other schools. Private teachers, on the other hand, had a similar income as public teachers. They had to worry about what would happen if the school failed. In the United States, it was the opposite. There was no secure job in the United States. Moreover, the income and social status of civil servants were not as high as in China. Therefore, not many people would enter the system. Moreover, the education system in the United States was divided into 2 parts. One part was universal. That meant that if one didn't have money, he could go to a public school. There were almost no fees. If one was from a well-off family and wanted to go to an elite school, they would have to go to a private school. The country didn't interfere with the fees charged by these schools, because to put it bluntly, it was a matter of willingness. Therefore, these private schools were profit-making institutions. The money invested could be recovered. Therefore, they were more willing to pay a higher price to hire teachers. In the United States, private schools had better facilities and better teachers. This was inevitable. The money earned here was more than twice as much as the national schools. These schools, which were not short of money, would naturally not care if they were hit by a snowstorm. If one building collapsed, it would not be a problem for them to build 2 more. This was because they could recover the money from the students' tuition fees. However, public schools could not do so. But even so, there would always be some people who wanted to devote themselves to education. Although Jiang Hai was not a noble person, it didn't mean that he wouldn't be moved by these people. Jiang Hai drove through the streets of Winthrop. It wasn't long before the new year, and the festive atmosphere was still very strong. This was the first time Jiang Hai drove through the town without a clear destination. Usually, he was lazy to shop. If he wanted to buy clothes or eat, he would just go there and leave. He really didn't take a good look at this town. Compared to some metropolises, Winthrop's modern elements were much lower. There were more bungalows than skyscrapers. In the whole town, there were only a dozen buildings with more than 5 floors. The snow on the roadside made this town look like a fairy tale. If it weren't for the fact that there were more white people with blonde hair and blue eyes walking on the roadside, Jiang Hai might have mistaken this place for a small town in China. Perhaps it was because it was still the holidays, so there were a lot of young people on the streets. It was much livelier than the last time Jiang Hai came to buy clothes. However, what made Jiang Hai the most unhappy was that the young men and women in the United States were too open. Each and every one of them was hugging and cuddling on the streets. What kind of nonsense was this? Every time he looked at them, it would cause 10,000 more damage to Jiang Hai, this golden bachelor dog. The cold air and the white world couldn't stop the love of the couples on the street at all. They snuggled up to each other, leaned in each other's arms, and rubbed their ears against each other to warm each other up. Some girls carefully held their boyfriends' arms, some girls directly stuffed their hands into each other's pockets to keep warm. Some couples sat in front of the window of a convenience store with steaming coffee and snacks in their hands, looking at the quiet town outside. The romance and warmth in the town, as well as the smell of surging hormones, made Jiang Hai quite uncomfortable. F***ck, I hope all the lovers in the world are brothers and sisters. Finally, he looked at a square in the distance. A girl was squatting there, and a boy was hugging the girl from behind. The two of them had their faces close to each other, talking and flirting. Jiang Hai's heart was completely occupied by the shadow. His original idea of donating was extinguished in an instant. With the idea of being a positive person, Jiang Hai rolled up the window again, then stepped on the accelerator and rushed to the southeast of the town. This was why he hated going out shopping. I'm destined to be a lone star. Muttering softly, Jiang Hai drove and couldn't help but recall his 27 years of life. When he was young, his mind matured late. When he was in junior high and high school, he also had crushes, but he didn't dare to pursue others. At that time, he liked to play games more. When he went to university, it was supposed to be the season of love, but unfortunately, he didn't fall in love. Later, he worked and stayed at home, so he didn't have the chance to accept other girls. Although it wasn't that he hadn't touched a girl before, his first time was when he drank too much and sacrificed himself to the big sword. For the rest of the time, only little left and little right accompanied him. Later, he finally got married. His wife was so beautiful, but unfortunately, his wife didn't like him. In the end, after getting married, he still had to rely on little left and little right. Finally, he had money and became a rich man. His family property was hundreds of millions, but he still had to rely on little left and little right. Only you two are the most loyal to me. It will be New Year soon. Should I buy a doll to reward myself? I heard that the quality of the dolls produced in Japan is not much different from a real person. Looking at the wind and snow outside, Jiang Hai muttered softly. He didn't know why, but as he spoke, he suddenly felt a little sad. When he didn't have money, he thought about having money. Now that he had money, the biggest problem was still not solved. Just as Jiang Hai was in a depressed mood, his car slowly drove to the gate of the town's elementary school. Looking from a distance, the situation of the town's elementary school was indeed not very optimistic at this time. There were originally a lot of houses, but 3 in the northwest corner had collapsed. Behind the houses, a small house that looked more like a warehouse than a gymnasium had also collapsed. It seems that it's really not very optimistic. Temporarily putting away his original sour thoughts, Jiang Hai looked at the school inside from the window and whispered softly. Today's update, 2 chapters in a row. Chapter 121. Hey, young man, what's the matter? Just as Jiang Hai was looking at the school in front of him in the car, suddenly the door of a small guard booth in the school opened. An old man wearing a thick cotton-padded coat came out and asked Jiang Hai with a serious face. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai didn't dare to be arrogant. He directly opened the door and jumped down from inside. Oh, this is the case. I want to ask, is Teacher Shite Clive here? Walking to the gate of the school, Jiang Hai said to the old man opposite him. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the old man looked at him with a puzzled look. Come in and wait, I'll ask. Anyway, it's the school holiday now. At present, except for the principal and the people who raised funds to build the school, he is the only one in the school. He is not afraid that Jiang Hai is a bad guy, so he opened the door for Jiang Hai and motioned him to come in and sit down. Jiang Hai thanked him and went into the small booth. As soon as he entered the small booth, Jiang Hai felt a warm air coming to his face. This small booth is warmer than Jiang Hai's car. Teacher Xanthi is on her way out, you wait for a while. After Jiang Hai entered the house, the old man also walked into the house, picked up the internal phone in the house, called the teacher in the school, and explained Jiang Hai's situation. After learning that Jiang Hai does know Teacher Xanthi, the old man came to tell him and then sat opposite him. Oh, okay. Hearing the old man's words, Jiang Hai also nodded with a smile, then continued to look at the school outside. Young man, are you from Winthrop? Maybe it's a little awkward to stay like this, the old man here took the initiative to ask. Well, I just came here last year. I have a green card here. I have a manor in the southwest of the town. Hearing the old man's words, Jiang Hai said to the old man with a smile. Oh. You're the boss of Green Forest? Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the old man's eyes couldn't help but light up as he asked curiously. Yes. Regarding this identity, Jiang Hai had no reason to refuse and directly nodded in agreement. Wow, you stirred up a lot of trouble a few months ago, but it's really hard to imagine that with your small arms and legs. How did you cause so many people to fall? Looking at Jiang Hai's figure, the old man here said with some doubts. Would you believe me if I said it was luck? In this regard, Jiang Hai really didn't understand why, so he could only smile awkwardly. Don't joke around. I don't believe in God. Kid, since you're so powerful, you should have practiced it before, right? Removing mud to control a server? Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the old man said as he mimicked Bruce Lee touching his nose. You can say that. Hearing the old man's words, Jiang Hai smiled even more awkwardly. Don't underestimate me. I was also a good fighter. If it was 40 years ago, you might not have been able to beat me. Seeing Jiang Hai's awkward smile, the old man seemed to be angry and boasted there. Listening to the old man's words, Jiang Hai smiled even more awkwardly, but since he was willing to talk, then Jiang Hai could only listen here. In fact, Jiang Hai's eyebrows had been twitching since he was 15 years old. Did this old man think that he hadn't read the history of Boston? As one of the first places to land on the American continent, in Massachusetts, except for the zoo, where are the wolves? At the age of 23, he also killed a polar bear and a penguin. These two animals should be in the Polar Museum. When have they been seen in nature? Even if Jiang Hai wasn't good at geography, he knew that penguins were from the South Pole. He even went to Las Vegas to gamble and earned $3 million. Well, Jiang Hai's heart was actually about to burst with joy, but he still pretended to be listening very seriously. When this old man bragged, it really made one's hair stand up in anger. Knock knock knock. Just as Jiang Hai was about to lose his patience, there was a knock on the window. Jiang Hai and the old man, who still wanted to continue, looked back and saw that Shendy Clive, whom Jiang Hai had just met yesterday, was leaning against the window outside the gazebo. I'm leaving. I'll come back to chat with you when I have time. Seeing that Shendy Clive was already here, Jiang Hai immediately wanted to leave. Although he still wanted to continue, the old man still wanted Jiang Hai to do serious business, so he patted Jiang Hai's shoulder and sent him out. As soon as he left the gazebo, Jiang Hai let out a long breath. Is Uncle Kyle telling you about his youth? Seeing Jiang Hai's expression, Shendy Clive outside the gazebo said with a smile. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai couldn't help but nod. The old man was too crazy when he was young. That's how he likes you. When he likes a young person, he will always tell him how brave he was when he was young. The more amazing he is, the more he likes you. To what extent did he tell you? While leading Jiang Hai into the school, Shendy Clive asked Jiang Hai curiously. I think he likes me very much, because he killed polar bears and penguins, and also killed killer whales, and then he won 3 million yuan in gambling, but he paid the money to the people he injured. Hearing Shendy Clive, Jiang Hai thought for a moment, so he likes me very much. Oh, that's not bad, but it's not his favorite. Do you know what he said to my sister, Karma Cliff, whom you met last night? Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Shendy Clive shrugged and said. I don't know. Jiang Hai froze for a moment. Could it be more exaggerated? Earned 30 million and beat 30 people? He told Karma that after he killed the killer whale, he pulled the killer whale's tail with one hand and dragged it ashore, and gave it to the refugees on the Caribbean side for free. Hearing Jiang Hai's inquiry, Shendy Clive said with a smile. Okay. At this time, Jiang Hai admitted defeat. 30 million, what is 30 people? Although Jiang Hai hasn't seen how big the killer whale is, it should be at least 8 or 9 meters, 8 or 9 tons. Dragging it ashore? No matter if others can do it or not, Jiang Hai can't do it anyway, even if he reaches the limit of human beings. Maybe it will be possible after he rises a few more levels. It seems that the sky is no longer the limit of the old man, his limit is the universe. By the way, what are you doing here this time? Didn't we agree to go to your place tomorrow? As the two talked, they walked into the school in the distance. After walking through the gate, Clive couldn't help but rub her hands. Although she only went out for a short while, she still felt very cold. After stamping her feet a few times and shaking off the snow on her shoes, she asked Jiang Hai. Well, can I ask, what is your main purpose for going to my place tomorrow? After thinking about it, Jiang Hai decided to ask directly. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Clive's face flashed a trace of embarrassment. You also know that the classroom of the town's elementary school collapsed, so we need to raise some money to rebuild the elementary school, but the townspeople don't have much money. I mainly want to see the size of your manor tomorrow. If I'm sure you have some spare money, I hope you can donate some money. In this regard, Clive did not hide her purpose and said directly. When she said this, Jiang Hai was relieved, but at the same time, he also felt a little sour. Although after Ai Dehua finished speaking yesterday, he felt that the probability of this beauty wanting to hook up with him was not more than 1 in 1,000. But now that the other party had personally extinguished this 1 in 1,000 chance, Jiang Hai was still a little sour. Otaku, you love to fantasize, the world's 3 great illusions. If you want to visit it, you're welcome to come back after spring. You won't see anything if you go now. You don't want to see my room, right? As for the donation you mentioned, Ai Dehua also told me yesterday. I think that as a citizen of this town, it is my duty to create a good learning environment for the children, so I came directly after signing the contract today. Looking at Clive, Jiang Hai shrugged and said to her with a smile. Really? That's great, thank you very much for your kindness. The place to donate is here, I'll take you there. Hearing that Jiang Hai was actually here to donate, Clive was instantly overjoyed and said to Jiang Hai with a face full of excitement. Then she took Jiang Hai to an office not far away. At this time, there were a dozen people standing or sitting in this office. These people were the school's leaders and teachers. Of course, not all of the teachers. Although it was not a private school, the number of teachers in this school was definitely not less than 30. Otherwise, the school would not exist. Now, these people were looking at the accounts on the table in front of them with a frown. So far, they had only raised a total of $12,000, which was only enough to build 1 classroom. The money for 2 more classrooms and the gymnasium was not yet settled. Thinking of this, these people began to have a headache again. These teachers were all paid by the government. Although it wasn't a small amount, it wasn't a lot either. Usually, other than living expenses, they basically didn't have much left. Nearly half of the money was pooled by them, but they couldn't afford to pay any more. Everyone, this is Mr. Jiang Hai. He's here to donate. At this time, Jiang Hai and Clive walked in together. As soon as they came in, Sandy introduced Jiang Hai enthusiastically. Hearing her words, several people over there raised their heads and showed kind smiles. Young man, thank you for your kindness. I thank you on behalf of everyone in this school. How much do you want to donate? Hearing that Jiang Hai was here to donate, an old man sitting here stood up and asked Jiang Hai with a smile. May I ask, how much money is left? Jiang Hai shook hands with the old man and asked him. So far, we have only raised the money to build 1 classroom. There are 2 more classrooms and the gymnasium. Preliminary calculations, we need at least $50,000. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, a black female teacher sitting next to him said helplessly. Then 60,000. Let's not say the least. No matter how hard it is, we can't let the children suffer. If we want to build it, we have to build it strong. Hearing the female teacher's words, Jiang Hai thought for a moment and said to the people in front of him with a smile. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, some of the lifeless rooms instantly quieted down. Almost everyone looked at Jiang Hai in surprise. 60,000? They were a little confused. Today's second update, Xiao Fei will be on the shelves on Friday. Please support and collect more. Chapter 122. I'm really grateful to you, young man. Looking at the check for $60,000 in Jiang Hai's hand, the principal of the town's elementary school held Jiang Hai's hand tightly with trembling hands and said gratefully, You're welcome. Jiang Hai really wanted to say that he was just trying to avoid paying taxes, but he really couldn't say that out loud. Before coming here this morning, Jiang Hai specially called his lawyer, Moses Adams. He asked about this matter. Although it was just a small donation of tens of thousands of dollars, Jiang Hai was a big client, so Moses Adams confirmed it as soon as he received Jiang Hai's call. The town's elementary school's donation collection was indeed within the scope of tax deductions, but it couldn't deduct too much. It could only deduct 80% of the tax. In other words, the donation of $60,000 could offset the tax of $48,000. Although it was still a waste of $12,000, at least it would leave a good reputation. Jiang Hai was such a person. Otherwise, he wouldn't do it. If he wanted to do it, he would do his best. So after hesitating for a while, he felt that what Ai Dehua said made sense. He was now in the United States. With the upgrade of the scales on his body, he couldn't easily leave here. Under such circumstances, instead of being stingy in building a car behind closed doors, it was better to build a good relationship with the people here. He didn't expect them to help him, but at least they wouldn't drag him down. It was precisely because of this that Jiang Hai was here today. In fact, he wasn't willing to part with $60,000. No, we still have to thank you. We're going to name the new stadium after you. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the principal didn't think so and still said excitedly. Upon hearing that he was going to name the stadium after himself, Jiang Hai couldn't help but be stunned for a moment. Then, he felt a little embarrassed. He suddenly felt that $60,000 was a little too little. Someone else was going to name a stadium after him. If this happened in China, it wouldn't be so easy. However, Jiang Hai, who was unwilling to fork out more money, could only laugh dryly. On the other hand, the principal and the teachers beside him were obviously still in a state of excitement. After all, the money problem that troubled them the most had been solved. The rest of the matter was much simpler. As long as a construction team was hired, the reconstruction of the 3 rooms and the gymnasium would be done very quickly. After all, the houses here were all bungalows. In addition to the shoddy construction in the United States, there were not many houses. The foundation was laid very well, so the foundation didn't need to be moved. They only needed to remove the main body of the house and rebuild it. Although it was winter now, it wasn't a problem for the construction team. The townspeople were still very concerned about this town's primary school. After all, it was a public primary school. Some students whose family conditions were not too good still hoped to study here. Therefore, as long as they didn't spend money and had time, they would come here to help. Because of this, there were still many people in town. It was also because of this that they almost didn't include the cost of labor. Otherwise, a gymnasium and 3 rooms couldn't be built with only $60,000 to $70,000. This money was enough to buy materials, but it was far from enough to pay for labor. However, Jiang Hai had never done engineering before, so he didn't understand this. Now, he was a little embarrassed by these people's praises. Looking at Jiang Hai's embarrassed expression, Sh20 Clive, who was beside him, reacted first. As a teacher, although she couldn't say that she had seen countless people, she could clearly see that these praises didn't make Jiang Hai feel very comfortable. Instead, it made him feel a little uncomfortable. This also showed that Jiang Hai's personality was a little introverted. Perhaps he would be very open in front of familiar people, but at least now, he was a little embarrassed. The reason why Jiang Hai came to donate money could be said to be inseparable from her. Now that Jiang Hai felt uncomfortable, she felt that it was also her responsibility, so she thought for a moment and took the initiative to speak up. This time, I'm really grateful to you. We don't have anything to say to you. It's also noon now. How about I treat you to lunch? Hearing Sh20 Clive's words, Jiang Hai couldn't help but be stunned. He originally planned to leave after donating the money, but he didn't expect that a beautiful woman would invite him to lunch now. What was going on? Hearing Sh20 Clive's words, the old principal also reacted and said immediately, yes, 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 look at me. I'm too busy talking. It's already noon. I guess Mr. Jiang is also hungry. Sandy, accompany Mr. Jiang to lunch. The money spent is on me. Forget it, principal. You don't have any money now. He was brought here by me, so naturally, I have to treat him. I don't know if Mr. Jiang will do me the honor. Hearing what the old principal said, Sh20 Clive immediately said to him, then turned her head and said to Jiang Hai. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai smiled a little awkwardly, although he didn't want to trouble others. But since the conversation had already reached this point, it was not appropriate for him to say anything. He could only nod to show that he agreed. Seeing that Jiang Hai agreed, Sh20 Clive also smiled, then took Jiang Hai out of the school again. In the United States, although almost every student after graduating from high school had a driver's license, because it also counted as credits. But not everyone had a car, especially some girls. Most boys liked cars, so when they graduated from high school, they would more or less beg their parents to buy them a car to show off. But girls were different. Sometimes they only learned to drive for credits. For example, Sh20 Clive didn't have a car. Fortunately, her home was not far from the school. It only took her 10 minutes to walk there every day, so it was convenient. But today, she wanted to treat Jiang Hai to a meal. There weren't any good restaurants near the school, so they had to take Jiang Hai's car to go to town. After the two of them greeted the guard, they got into Jiang Hai's car. From here, it could be seen that Jiang Hai was really dull. Usually, in this kind of situation, the man would be very gentlemanly and open the door for the woman, but Jiang Hai just got into the driver's seat. This made Sh20 Clive look at Jiang Hai with some confusion. This Jiang Hai is a bit interesting. Seeing that Sh20 Clive had already gotten into the car, Jiang Hai smiled and asked her, "Where are we going?" Hearing Jiang Hai's question, Sh20 Clive thought for a while and decided to take Jiang Hai to eat a good meal. Let's go eat steak. I know a French restaurant in town that is quite good. Hearing that they were going to eat French food, Jiang Hai calculated in his mind. French food was known as the most gorgeous and also the most expensive food in the world. Jiang Hai had wanted to eat there before he became rich, but after he became rich, he really didn't eat it. This was because French food was famous for its foie gras and snails, but Jiang Hai didn't like to eat either. As for steak, the French preferred to use the outer rib to make steak. For Jiang Hai, the outer rib was a bit fat. Compared to outer rib, he preferred to eat tenderloin, meat and upper rib, which were all relatively thin. As for the marbled pattern, the pattern was indeed fat, but this thing almost melted after being roasted. When it entered the mouth, other than the fresh taste of butter, it didn't have the taste of fat. Moreover, even if he wanted to eat steak, he wouldn't eat it at home. Was it so easy to eat special grade A beef outside? But now, since it was Sandy who said it, Jiang Hai couldn't refuse. After all, the two were not very familiar with each other, so he just followed the host's wishes. So after asking for the way, Jiang Hai drove to the Western restaurant. On the way, the two were obviously embarrassed, because Jiang Hai was a taciturn person. He wouldn't take the initiative to find a topic to chat with a girl, otherwise, he wouldn't be as lonely as he was now. Sh20 Clive, although an American girl, was a girl after all. Moreover, she and Jiang Hai weren't very familiar with each other. Today was only the third time they met, so there was nothing to talk about. For a while, the atmosphere in the car was very strange, but fortunately, Jiang Hai's driving skills were still very good after being optimized. The car was fast and stable. Before the atmosphere in the car dropped below the freezing point, he had already driven the car. After parking the car in front of the hotel, Jiang Hai and SH20 Clive walked into the Western restaurant together. Sir, madam, hello, do you want to eat? Do you have a reservation? Although the Western restaurant in the town was certainly not comparable to the main city like Boston, the quality of the staff here was much better than the same type of restaurant. As soon as Jiang Hai and SH20 Clive walked in, a waiter took the initiative to greet them and said to them with a smile. We want to eat, but we don't have a reservation. Hearing the waiter's words, Sandy also took the initiative to say. In this season, no restaurant was full, so after hearing that Sandy and Jiang Hai didn't have a reservation, the waiter didn't say anything like sorry, but directly led the two to a table for two. After the two sat down, a handsome white guy also came over with a menu and asked the two what they wanted to eat. Take a look first, today is my treat, so you don't have to be polite, just order whatever you want to eat. She took the initiative to hand over the menu to Jiang Hai and said with a smile. Jiang Hai didn't stand on ceremony, he directly took the menu and looked at it. But when he looked at it, he was a little confused, because he didn't know what was written on it. Western restaurants like this were divided into two sections. One was the single order section, which was much easier to say. You could order whatever you wanted to eat, and 90% of these were main dishes. The other section was the set meal, which mainly consisted of main dishes. It was divided into set A, set B, and set C. There was a lot of variety, and it was written in both English and French. Just looking at it made Jiang Hai's teeth hurt. It will be on the shelves tomorrow morning, the first chapter will be promoted, and the first chapter will be promoted, after all, it's in the middle of the month. Starting from the second day, there will be a minimum of 4 chapters a day. If the new subscriptions are read over 3,000 a day, 2 chapters will be updated over 4,000, and 3 chapters will be updated over 5,000. There is no limit, please support Little Faye, thank you. Chapter 123. I really don't understand, it's up to you. To be honest, this is my first time eating French food. I don't know what's so good about it. If he understood, he understood. If he didn't understand, he didn't understand. Jiang Hai's biggest advantage was his confidence. In front of women, if he didn't understand, then he wouldn't pretend. So after looking around, he smacked his teeth. He handed the menu back and said with a helpless expression. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, SH20 Clive was stunned for a moment, because in her opinion, a rich person like Jiang Hai should pursue quality of life, so she brought Jiang Hai to eat French food. But unexpectedly, Jiang Hai hasn't eaten French food before, which made Sandy a little dumbfounded. Well, I hope you will like what we order later. Give us 2 sets. After taking a look at the menu, SH20 Clive looked at it and said. Is it set A, set B, or set C? Hearing Sandy's words, the waiter asked. Set B. After looking at the menu, SH20 Clive thought for a moment and said. The so-called set A, B, and C are also particular here. Set A is commonly known as the traditional set, with a total of 13 dishes. The first is frozen appetizer, the second is soup, the third is hot appetizer, the fourth is fish, the fifth is main dish, the sixth is hot appetizer, the seventh is cold appetizer, the eighth is snow, the ninth is barbecue or salad, the 10th is vegetables, the 11th is dessert, the 12th is salty, and the 13th is dessert. Generally speaking, this is a very formal banquet, only then will there be so many rules. Obviously, Jiang Hai didn't have the patience to wait for him to serve 13 dishes. It was precisely because of this that Xanthi ordered the B-set meal. The B-set meal consisted of 5 dishes, a frozen appetizer, a soup, a hot appetizer, a main dish, and a dessert. In addition, there was also the C-set meal, which consisted of an appetizer, a main dish, and a dessert. For the frozen appetizer, SH20 Clive chose tuna salad. Of course, it is estimated that each person can only get a few slices of tuna. For the soup, she chose cream of mushroom soup. After all, this is the most famous French dish. For the hot appetizer, she chose French stewed potatoes, and for the dessert, she wants strawberry crepe. But when it comes to the main dish, she hesitated. What do you recommend today? Sandy is not in a hurry. After hesitating for a long time, she still can't make a decision, so she raised her head and asked the waiter in front of her. Today's recommendation is red wine stewed beef. We just received the new Burgundy red wine from France this morning. You too can try it. Hearing the waiter's words, SH20 Clive nodded with satisfaction. That's it. You can serve it now. After she confirmed that she wants this, the waiter also bowed respectfully and went to tell the kitchen to serve the dishes. After he left, Jiang Hai looked at SH20 Clive. It seems like you come here often. Jiang Hai looked around and said to SH20 Clive. Well, I come here often because a long time ago, my father was a chef here. I often came here when I was young to play, but since my father stopped working here, I have come here about 4 or 5 times. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, SH20 Clive smiled and said. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai can't help but nod. A French chef seems to be very powerful. What about you? You are rich, haven't you eaten French food? It shouldn't be. After answering Jiang Hai's question, SH20 Clive asked Jiang Hai. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai's face was a little shy. Hee, me? Don't laugh when I tell you. I used to be born in a poor family. Later, I got rich by chance and came to the United States to buy the Green Forest Manor. Deep in my bones, I still have the mindset of a small farmer. So, you can see that I almost never interact with the people in the town. I just stay at home. To tell you the truth, you might not believe it. Now, other than knowing what the mayor, the police chief, and a few salespeople in the supermarket in the town look like, I only know my subordinates. I don't know anyone in the town. I usually come to town to eat, and I often eat at the Italian restaurant on the west side of town. Their fried crab meat is very delicious. Looking at SH20 Clive, Jiang Hai slowly said. Wow, you're really different from the rich people I know. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, SH20 Clive was a little surprised. Originally, she thought that Jiang Hai didn't interact with the people in town because he didn't like the people in town. He might have his own circle of friends, but now it seems that the shy boy in front of her is more like an otaku. I didn't expect you to like the food in that Italian restaurant. I also like it. Have you tried the lobster spaghetti there? Since they started talking, SH20 Clive also casually talked to Jiang Hai. Yes, the taste is not bad. The milky smell is very strong, but for me, it is a bit fishy. Other than that, everything else is fine. Hearing SH20 Clive's words, Jiang Hai also immediately said. How can lobsters not be fishy? Also, I heard that the Green Forest also has a fish farm. As the owner of a fish farm, you don't eat fishy lobsters? Looking at Jiang Hai, SH20 Clive said half-jokingly. I eat it. That's why I said it was a bit fishy, not very fishy. Jiang Hai blinked and said innocently. Okay, you are playing a language trap with a teacher? Do you really think this is good? Looking at Jiang Hai, Sandy couldn't help but laugh. Looking at Sandy's appearance, Jiang Hai also chuckled and then continued. To be honest, this should be the first time in 2 years that Jiang Hai said so much to a girl. Although Jiang Hai is a bit shy and introverted, he is a very cheerful person. But ever since his parents passed away, he more or less felt inferior when interacting with strangers. Therefore, his cheerful side would only face people he is familiar with, not strangers. He and Sandy should be considered strangers, but he had no choice. He hadn't chatted with people of his age for a long time. In the manor, there were only 2 people of his age. Halamon couldn't chat with him. Although Biyao would chat with him sometimes, he had to work most of the time. The only people who could chat with him and have free time to chat with him were Philip's 2 sons. But they just came here to celebrate the festival. After Christmas and New Year, they would leave. Once they left, Jiang Hai would have nothing to do. After holding back for a few days, today, when he heard Sandy aroused his desire to talk, he also began to talk non-stop. As for Sandy, she also liked to listen to Jiang Hai, because she thought Jiang Hai's words were very interesting and simple. He didn't sound like those rich playboys who bragged all day long. Although he was rich, his words were very close to life. This made Xanthi have a good impression of Jiang Hai. In addition, Jiang Hai had helped her schools solve their money problem, so she was grateful to him. In addition to this good impression of him, further development could only be discussed in the future. But at least for now, she was very willing to chat with Jiang Hai. Teachers were actually very talkative, so the more they talked, the happier they were. Even after the dishes were served, the two of them were still eating and chatting. In fact, this was somewhat impolite in Western countries. It was just like the request of the elderly in China. They did not talk while eating and sleeping. However, the two of them were of the same age, so no one cared about this. As the two talked, sh20, Clive realized that Jiang Hai was really an interesting man. Maybe it was because he didn't work outside after leaving school, but sometimes Jiang Hai seemed a bit naive. He didn't talk and do things like an adult, but more like a big boy. Listening to his complaints, listening to his jokes, and listening to him showing off the fish and beef in his manner, sh20, Clive suddenly felt that this guy was really interesting. He wasn't as pretentious as she thought, nor was he crazy. Instead, he was a bit lively. Whether this kind of person was suitable to be a boyfriend was another matter, but it wouldn't be bad if he could be a friend. The beef here is cooked well, but the beef itself is far inferior to mine. When you have time, you can come to my place to play. Let's not talk about other things, but I have more than enough special grade A beef. At this time, Jiang Hai didn't notice any changes in sh20, Clive. He only used his fork to stab at the burgundy red wine stewed beef in front of him as he spoke to her with a smile. Okay, then I want to try the taste of special grade A beef. I haven't had it in a while. Let me tell you, the last time I had special grade A beef, my dad was still the head chef here. I snuck into the kitchen to eat it. It's been many years. At that time, I only ate a small piece, but I was fascinated by it. But since you said you have enough, then I'll go eat it tomorrow, sh20, Clive said with a smile when she saw Jiang Hai talking about the beef in his manner. Okay, no problem, you're welcome anytime. But my manor is now completely white, and there's nothing to play with. It's freezing to go out to sea by boat. After a while, when the cattle are released and we can go out to sea, then there'll be a lot of fun. Jiang Hai wasn't bragging. The special grade beef in his manor was indeed enough. In his view, sh20, Clive was now his friend, so it wasn't a big deal to come over and eat beef. The only pity was that there was nothing to play with now. This doesn't matter, we can eat at night. Oh right, I heard you say that you haven't toured Boston yet. How about this, in order to thank you for treating me to beef tomorrow night, I'll be your guide tomorrow morning and take you around Boston. Today's second update, continuously delivered. Please support me. Chapter 124. Boss, you're back. With the roar of the car, Jiang Hai's F650 also stopped in the parking lot in front of his villa. When Jiang Hai got out of the car, Tommy Charles and the others in the distance had already seen him and walked over with smiles on their faces. Seeing these people take the initiative to greet him, Jiang Hai immediately smiled. Well, I'm back. How are you guys? Have you settled down? Looking at the originally dark small villas in the distance at this time, Jiang Hai also smiled and said to them. Well, we've settled down. Boss, I have to admit that the hardware here is really good. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Tommy Charles couldn't help but speak first. To be honest, after coming here, he realized how wise his decision was. Although Jiang Hai didn't give him a lot of money, and there was no clear ratio of bonuses, he still didn't give Jiang Hai enough money. Everything was according to Jiang Hai's mood, but the hardware here was really good. Originally, these people thought that when Jiang Hai said that he would provide food and accommodation, they would live in the kind of workers' room. As for food, except for the fish. The so-called beef was enough to eat some usable grade beef that retailed at $3 a pound. Originally, in their hearts, they planned to do so. After all, they were here to make money, not to take a vacation. As long as Jiang Hai paid them on time, there would be no problem. However, when they followed Ai Dehua to Jiang Hai's manor, they were dumbfounded. They were really living in the legendary small detached villas, not the ordinary worker's room. Everyone had their own privacy. In the small villa, there was everything. Although it was not big, it was not a problem for a family to live in. As for the living conditions, when they first arrived, they were already confused. Satisfied, very satisfied, very satisfied. If such a small villa was rented outside, the annual rent would be a few $1,000s. In Jiang Hai's place, however, they could live here for free, which was equivalent to giving them an extra $100 a week. What was there to be dissatisfied about? After putting everything away, they followed Ai Dehua to the warehouse to get what they wanted to eat. As soon as they arrived at the warehouse, they realized that Jiang Hai was really too generous. The imagined small amount of usable beef did not exist at all. In Jiang Hai's place, the superior and specially selected beef was kept by Luo Binci. Naturally, this level of beef was prepared for Jiang Hai. Other than the special grade and the special grade, Robins and the others could eat them. In other words, the meat they ate was all the best and standard. Not to mention usable meat, even commercial grade beef was fed to the dogs. Jiang Hai had so many cattle dogs at home, and there were 2 big dogs. Jiang Hai had picked up Xiao Bai's sea eagle. These guys naturally ate beef, except for Xiao Bai and Jiang Hai, who ate the superior and specially selected grade beef. The other dogs ate commercial grade beef. As for Xiao Huang and Xiao Bai, they mainly ate standard beef. Of course, sometimes they would eat some good beef that Jiang Hai rewarded them. This beef was usually not eaten in some American families, but in Jiang Hai's manor, it was fed to the dogs. One had to admit that sometimes Jiang Hai was really a spendthrift. But for these fishermen, when they received the food, they were even more shocked. Inside Jiang Hai's manor, there was no ration of food. Instead, they could eat whatever they wanted. If you want to eat fish, then take fish. If you want to eat beef, then take beef. If you want to eat whatever you want, then take whatever you want, as long as you don't waste it. And most importantly, you can't sell it outside. Aside from that, Jiang Hai didn't have any requirements for them. So when these fishermen came home with more than 10 pounds of beef, their wives couldn't help but feel numb. In the past, they could only eat the beef during the New Year's festivals. Unexpectedly, it was taken back by their own men. It seemed that living in this manner was the best choice. It was precisely because of this that these fishermen were a little confused. As the saying goes, one's hand blinds one's eye. After everything was settled, a few new fishermen gathered together. They also gathered together to express their attitude. They must work hard for Jiang Hai. Otherwise, they would really be kicked out by Jiang Hai. They would not be able to find such benefits anywhere else. It's fine as long as you're satisfied. Work hard for me, and I won't treat you badly. Have a good rest today, and discuss with Ai Dehua tomorrow about how to be on duty. You may have heard that when I went to sell fish a few days ago, I might have been targeted by others. If there are boats coming to my territory to steal fish, you'll have to put in some effort. Seeing that the fishermen were very satisfied, Jiang Hai also smiled. Then, he patted the arm of Eleanor Cece, who was silent beside him, and said to them earnestly, "Don't worry, if those bastards dare to come, I will let them have a taste of my old buddy's power." Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Tommy Charles also said immediately. Jiang Hai knew that the old buddy they were talking about was the gun. These fishermen had the habit of carrying guns when they went out to sea. After all, the sea was different from land. If something happened, it would be troublesome. Then I will have to trouble you. Go back and rest quickly. Hearing their words and feeling their spirit, Jiang Hai also nodded with satisfaction. Recruiting people, other things were not too important. The most important thing was to have a state where they were willing to work hard for his career. At least, Jiang Hai was very satisfied with the current state of these people. Well, okay. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, everyone here nodded happily to Jiang Hai and then walked back to their rooms. As for Jiang Hai, he walked back to his villa. However, after returning, he did not go directly to the house. Instead, he went to the warehouse first. He remembered that he invited Shendiclive to come over to eat beef tomorrow. He did not want to run out of beef by then. Fortunately, there is still beef. Walking into the warehouse's freezer, Jiang Hai saw a few large pieces of beef hanging in the air. These beef were left behind by robins and the others after they killed the cows. As far as the current situation was concerned, it was still in a very fresh state. Very good. Besides beef, is there anything else? This was the first time Jiang Hai invited a girl to his house for dinner. Even if his reaction was half a beat slower, he was still a little slow. He did not particularly understand what this meant. In fact, he did not think about it that way. The reason why he was here to see what else was in the house was entirely because of the genes of an otaku. If he wanted to treat someone to a meal, he would not treat them. If he wanted to treat someone to a meal, naturally, he would eat well, especially when the other party was a beauty. After checking the beef and confirming that it was superior grade, Jiang Hai looked at other things. But after looking at it, Jiang Hai couldn't help but frown. This was because the ingredients in his warehouse, in addition to the special grade beef, there were only some prawns and crabs left. After the lobsters were caught yesterday, they were eliminated by him and the people in the manor. The remaining prawns and crabs, to be honest, the people in the United States almost didn't eat crabs. They only ate the legs of crabs. They didn't have much interest in the hard-to-get meat, especially the fishermen. They didn't like prawns and crabs, which were more troublesome to eat. Therefore, the only person who liked to eat them here was Jiang Hai. But on the contrary, compared to prawns and crabs, lobsters are something they like to eat very much. These guys will also pick delicious things to eat. I'm the owner of a fishery. I treat a girl to a meal, but I don't even have lobsters. It's really embarrassing. Scratching his head, Jiang Hai muttered in a low voice. After thinking for a while, he felt that he should go to the sea tonight to catch a few. After learning that the sharks under the sea were not a threat, Jiang Hai's courage increased a lot. But thinking about it, the sky is dark outside, and the water is cold. If I go into the water to catch lobsters? Ugh, I'm crazy. In fact, the best way was to let AI Dehua and the others bring back some lobsters when they patrolled tomorrow. However, Chinese people, especially Chinese otakus, had a common problem. They didn't like to ask others to help them. There was no need to ask others to help them do things that they could do. In his opinion, he could do the lobsters himself, so he was a little uncomfortable to ask AI Dehua for help. However, considering that it was cold and late at night, he still felt that he should trouble AI Dehua. After returning to his room, Jiang Hai called AI Dehua with the mentality of being rejected. However, when AI Dehua heard that Jiang Hai wanted to treat a girl to a meal at home tomorrow, he naturally patted his chest and said that there was no problem. Not to mention lobsters, even if it was something else, he would find a way to get it. Moreover, although lobsters were rare on the nearby coast, after all, Jiang Hai's underwater water resources were extremely abundant. There was no shortage of lobsters. He only needed to make the fishing net deeper. Even if he couldn't catch lobsters that were too big, it wouldn't be a problem for him to catch about 5 kilograms of lobsters. 5 kilograms of lobsters would be good enough for him to treat others to a meal. Hearing AI Dehua's words, Jiang Hai couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. Fortunately, he agreed. If he had some hesitation, then Jiang Hai would have to find a way to get it himself. It seems that Jiang Hai's position is still not right. He is the boss, not a worker. Sometimes, the mindset of a commoner is really the biggest obstacle to becoming a capitalist. with the idea of going to Boston tomorrow to play. Well, of course, he also had the idea of going out with Sandy. Jiang Hai quickly fell asleep on his big bed, but maybe because he was excited, he woke up at 6:00 the next morning. After washing his face and brushing his teeth, he saw that it was still early, so he went to exercise. When he came back, he received a text message from Shendy Clive, asking if he had woken up. When Jiang Hai saw the text message, he quickly replied on his phone. This was the first time he texted a girl in a long time. The last time he texted a girl was to inform his wife that he was leaving. But in his heart, this kind of text message obviously didn't count. Chapter 125. Hey, sorry to keep you waiting. Shendy Clive looked at the F-650 parked on the road. She walked out of the small villa behind her and smiled at Jiang Hai. Jiang Hai also opened the door and jumped out of the car. It's fine, I just arrived. Jiang Hai immediately waved his hand and said. He didn't care about the awkwardness of playing Plants vs. Zombies on his phone. His face was filled with a bright smile. At the same time, he looked at Shendy Clive in front of him. He had to admit that Shendy Clive was very beautiful today. Shendy Clive was originally of mixed race. She had introduced herself before. Her father was a white man from the United States, and her mother was Venezuelan. Venezuela was the country that produced the most beautiful women in the world. Her mother was also very beautiful in Venezuela. However, women who were too beautiful sometimes couldn't be kept if they didn't have enough money. That was why she ran away with the boss of the Western restaurant where her father worked. Her father was disheartened and brought her back to his hometown, Boston. He became a chef and found her a stepmother. That stepmother was her current sister, Karma Cliff's mother. Jiang Hai originally thought it was strange. Although the two sisters looked similar, their hair and skin color were different. Today, Shendy Clive deliberately dressed up. Her long brown hair was pulled straight and buttoned. Because she inherited her father's genes, she was very tall, about 1.75 meters tall. She had a well-proportioned body, especially her two long legs. According to Jiang Hai's estimation, her legs were about 1 meters long. What she inherited from her mother was her skin texture and delicate facial features. Her skin was not as thick as that of a white person. Instead, it was as delicate as that of an Asian. Her facial features were also much more delicate than that of an orthodox white person. It made people feel very comfortable looking at her. Shendy Clive looked at Jiang Hai's smile and said embarrassedly, "Okay, I didn't expect you to wake up so early. This weather is perfect for sleeping in." To apologize, I'll treat you to breakfast. Let's go." When she sent the message to Jiang Hai, she didn't know that Jiang Hai was here. She had just woken up. The primary school in the United States was a free-range model. It was more to stimulate the children's nature. It was more like an extension of kindergarten than a primary school. There weren't many cultural classes. What the 5th graders learned in China were what the 2nd graders learned in the United States. The children didn't learn much, so naturally, they didn't have much homework. More homework, such as the kind of outdoor activities, watching the diary, and so on, the children's burden was lighter. Naturally, the teachers weren't too busy, not to mention that it was a holiday. If it weren't for the collapse of the school, teachers like Sandy wouldn't have to go to school. Now that Jiang Hai had paid for it, she had nothing to do. Yesterday afternoon, the principal had already found someone to contact the materials and staff to prepare for the reconstruction. Although it was the coldest time in Boston, school would start in a few days. It was impossible for them to build it before school started, but they had to hurry up. Because of this, after dinner yesterday, Jiang Hai sent her home, which was the villa behind her. Because these days, the school's problems had been pressing on her, making her very tired. She fell asleep and didn't wake up until 8:00 in the morning. When she woke up, she sent a message to Jiang Hai, asking if Jiang Hai had woken up. In the end, after Jiang Hai said that he would be at her house around 8:30. But a woman, especially a beautiful woman, wouldn't go out so casually. When Jiang Hai arrived at her house, she was still putting on makeup. So even though she saw Jiang Hai's car, she couldn't just go down halfway. She could only bite the bullet and put on for another half an hour. As for asking Jiang Hai to come in, she had considered it. But because she was single now, she lived here with her parents and her sister. If she suddenly asked a strange man to come into her house, what if her parents misunderstood? So after hesitating for a long time, she could only send a message to Jiang Hai to tell him that she was still putting on makeup. In this regard, Jiang Hai only curled his lips and had nothing to say. Fortunately, he wasn't stupid and didn't come out to wait. Instead, he sat in the driver's seat and played with his mobile phone. Time passed quickly, thank you. Hearing that Xanthi wanted to treat him to breakfast, Jiang Hai didn't refuse, but said with a smile. Then he got in the car first and opened the door for Xanthi. Although it was still not gentlemanly, Xanthi had long been used to it. In fact, she was quite comfortable with Jiang Hai treating her like this. Where are we going now? After Xanthi got in the car and fastened her seatbelt, Jiang Hai asked her. We are going to the town entrance now. There is a small Mexican restaurant that tastes very good. The burritos there are the best in town. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, SH-20 Clive also said with a smile. Okay, you lead the way. Hearing Xanthi's words, Jiang Hai also smiled, then turned the steering wheel and went to the place that SH-20 Clive said. Before leaving town, they found the small Mexican restaurant. When it comes to Mexican food, 9 out of 10 people will think of 2 things, burritos and chili. It turns out that the restaurant recommended by SH-20 Clive is really good. The signature burrito is Mexican beef burrito. The beef in this burrito is naturally not steak. After all, it only costs $5, so it is not expensive. Therefore, it is filled with beef stuffing and dough made with special seasoning. It has the taste of meat sauce and the fragrance of corn, but it is not greasy. The beef stuffing inside is matched with the most famous chili sauce in Mexico. It doesn't need to be too spicy, it needs to be spicy with a hint of sweetness and sourness. It is simple, but the taste is really good. This is the first time that Jiang Hai has seen such delicious food. With a drink, Jiang Hai ate 6 burritos in one breath before he was satisfied. Although this is not much, Jiang Hai's big appetite also shocked SH-20 Clive. Wow, I didn't expect you to eat so much. After coming out of the burrito shop and returning to the car, Jiang Hai was still thinking about the delicious food just now. SH-20 Clive looked at him in surprise. It's delicious, so I ate a little more. Hee, how are we going now? With a bright smile, Jiang Hai asked SH-20 Clive. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, SH-20 Clive also smiled, then pointed with her slender finger. Let's go to Boston first, that is our main goal today. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai secretly slapped his forehead. Why am I so stupid? Didn't I say that we are going to Boston today? With an awkward smirk, Jiang Hai started the car and headed for the city of Boston. After about an hour's drive, they entered Boston's territory, and under the command of SH-20 Clive, their first battle was to go to Bunker Mountain, which is also one of the must-go places in Boston. This is one of the most famous places in Boston, an ancient battlefield during the Revolutionary War. Because at the time of the Revolutionary War, this was a very important vantage point overlooking the entire Boston city area. At that time, our opponent, the British Army, launched 2 crazy attacks in order to seize the mountain, but they were repelled by our brave independent soldiers and civilians. The casualties of the British Army reached 1,000 people. But later, when the British Army attacked for the 3rd time, our ammunition was not enough and we had to retreat, but it also won the hearts of the people. Later, because of a battle, it was also recorded in history. It was also at that time that George Washington was appointed as the Commander-in-Chief of the Independent Army. Although it was called Bunker Mountain, it was actually not a mountain, but a tower. It was built to commemorate this battle. For the people of the United States, this may be very memorable, but for Jiang Hai, it was just that. After all, the history of the United States, from the beginning of the Mayflower War to the present, was less than 400 years. They really had no history here. Even if there was history, it was of the Native Americans, but this had nothing to do with the white people of the United States. Moreover, was the death of 1,000 people very heavy? Well, for the United Kingdom, it might be very heavy. After looking at Bunker Mountain, which was actually a pillar, they went to the Old North Church, which was known as the oldest church in Boston. They also went to Farnell Hall, which was known as the Cradle of Freedom, and took a look at the Boston Library from the outside. However, they could not enter this place. Jiang Hai and the others were not students from this area. Moreover, he did not have the leisure to read books. Originally, Shendy Clive wanted to take Jiang Hai to see the famous Granella Cemetery. However, Jiang Hai rejected. Wuxia people and the United States people had different thoughts. If they had nothing to do, why would they want to see a cemetery? The atmosphere was gloomy. Under normal circumstances, if it was not a New Year, a festival, or a Memorial Day, the Chinese would rarely go to a cemetery. Although they were not afraid of their loved ones buried there, they would still have some doubts. Some people would say that this was a religion or superstition. However, these things were passed down from the older generation. You could choose not to believe it, but you could not ignore it. It was like some hidden rules in society. There were no written rules, but if you did not play by the rules of the game, you might be the unlucky one in the end. However, when Mu Di was mentioned, Jiang Hai could not help but think of his parents. Because he did not have much money back then, his parents did not buy a cemetery. Instead, they placed it at the crematorium. Of course, now that he had money, he could buy a cemetery. However, moving a cemetery was not something that could be done casually. One of the conditions was that they had to wait for 3 years before they could move. Now that his father had enough, his mother still needed 1 more year. Now, he was a little hesitant. Should he go back to take a look during the new year? Chapter 126. Wow, I didn't expect it to be so delicious. The taste is really good. Speaking of visiting Boston, Jiang Hai wasn't very interested in it. He came here mainly for 2 reasons. First, he really hadn't been here before. Second, it was Shendy Clive who invited him. Of course, it was mainly because of the second reason. Speaking of which, Jiang Hai was more interested in natural scenery. He wasn't interested in the things in the city. The main reason for visiting Boston wasn't the scenery, but the people. The city of Boston wasn't big, and the scenery was concentrated in a few places. There weren't any scenic spots that required more than half an hour to visit. Therefore, after Jiang Hai decided not to go to the cemetery, their tour in Boston City was actually over. They made an appointment to visit other surrounding counties in the afternoon. They wanted to see Harvard, MIT, and so on. But before that, they needed to fill their stomachs. Later, Shendy Clive took Jiang Hai to a restaurant. Although the restaurant looked small, shabby, and old from the outside, it was very popular. If Shendy Clive hadn't made a reservation in advance, they might have had to wait for a few hours to get a seat. But even so, they were only able to get a seat after working for nearly half an hour. The location wasn't very good. It was a very small cubicle for 2 people. The seat next to it was used to store clothes, but it wasn't enough. They could only put it under their buttocks or put it on their legs. To be honest, Jiang Hai wasn't very satisfied with this place. He didn't say that he had to go to those magnificent Western restaurants to eat, but he didn't like the dilapidated appearance of this place. However, Shendy Clive liked this place, so he couldn't say anything. He could only bite the bullet and sit there. When the waiter came to take their order, he looked around. Although the restaurant looked shabby, it actually had Chinese menu, and all the dishes were good. Most of them were seafood, and the main dishes were oysters and lobsters. At the same time, the price was definitely not cheap. It was even more expensive than the French restaurant Jiang Hai went to yesterday. Jiang Hai was a little speechless. According to 20 Clive, the waiter's 18% tip was included in the price. In other words, after eating, they could leave directly without having to pay a tip. He had never eaten here before, so in the end, he let 20 Clive order. After hearing Jiang Hai's words, 20 Clive ordered 2 sets of soup, 2 sets of lobster set, and 1 set of seafood set. After ordering, while they were waiting, 20 Clive introduced the restaurant to Jiang Hai. The name of this restaurant was United Oyster House. It was the earliest restaurant in the United States. Therefore, it had a great reputation. Many of the people who came to eat here were tourists from other places. Of course, the natives of the United States also liked to eat here. Especially for the old Bostonians, the taste of the seafood here was quite good. After hearing her introduction, Jiang Hai became more interested in this place. After a while, the waiter brought the food Jiang Hai ordered. The so-called soup was basically cheddar soup, but there were more ingredients, and the taste was stronger. The lobster set was steamed lobster with their own sauce. As for the oyster set, Jiang Hai just looked at it. Because the oysters were all raw, there were 2 opened oysters on a plate. 2 of them were raw oysters, but they were bigger than the oysters Jiang Hai usually bought at Bing City's night market for 10 renminbi. Inside the shells of the other 2 oysters were some raw oysters. In addition to these, there were 2 already peeled Arctic sweet prawns, a bowl of sauce, and 2 lemons. Looking at these things, Jiang Hai's first thought was to curse out loud. After all, these things cost more than $100, which was indeed a little too expensive. But when he suppressed his anger and took a sip of the soup in front of him, this thought disappeared without a trace, because the soup was indeed delicious. I'm glad you like it. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, 20 Clive chuckled and drank the soup in front of him. Drinking the soup in front of him, Jiang Hai nodded seriously and said approvingly, "Well, the soup is really good. The soup is cheddar soup, but the taste is not bad." Then he tasted the lobster. This lobster was also different. Although it looked like a very ordinary lobster, when he opened it, he found that the meat inside had been torn and mixed with the cheese. After all, China is too big, and there are more cuisines. People in different places eat different things. For example, people in the Northeast like to eat greasy, oily, fried, fragrant, and large pieces of meat. Going further south, one of the 8 major cuisines, Lu cuisine, pays attention to taste. Lu cuisine does not pay too much attention to the taste of the ingredients themselves. They are more willing to let others taste their own seasoning skills, so when it comes to mixing, Lu cuisine is the best. Lu cuisine is not too focused on the taste of the ingredients themselves. They are more willing to let others taste their own seasoning skills, so when it comes to mixing, Lu cuisine is the best. Other Cantonese cuisine was light, Jiangsu cuisine was good-looking, and Sichuan cuisine was mainly numbing and spicy. Zhejiang cuisine was similar to Jiangsu cuisine in that it focused on presentation and delicacy. Fujian cuisine focused on the flavor of the ingredients. Anhui cuisine focused on stews with heavy fire and oil. Hunan cuisine was similar to Sichuan cuisine, except that it changed from numbing and spicy to numbing and fresh. But overall, there was a big difference between the north and the south. When northerners went to the south, everything they ate tasted bland. First, it didn't satisfy their hunger, and second, it didn't satisfy their cravings. Everything they ate felt wrong, and they couldn't be full no matter how much they ate. When southerners went to the north, it was the same. Because the food was too oily, they would get hot and blister in their mouth. It was very uncomfortable. This was the difference between the north and the south. If the food in this restaurant was divided according to the region of Wuxia, it should be similar to the north's cuisine. The lobster and soup were very fragrant, and there was a lot of cheese in it. It was very greasy and could satisfy one's cravings. Northerners tasted good, but southerners felt it was very greasy. They even felt a little hoarse. In China, people who were used to eating Sichuan, Jiangsu, Fujian, Zhejiang, Hunan, and Cantonese cuisines couldn't stand the taste. However, when it came to Jianghai, the taste was very good. It wasn't long before he finished the soup and lobster in front of him. As for the oysters, as mentioned before, Jianghai didn't eat raw food. Because his stomach wasn't good in the past, he was naturally a little afraid of raw food, especially seafood. Therefore, he didn't eat sashimi at all. He only knew that it wasn't cheap, but he wasn't used to eating it. Perhaps because she saw that Jianghai didn't want to eat oysters, the Shendi Clive was more or less embarrassed. In fact, she didn't know that Jianghai didn't eat raw food. In this restaurant, oysters were the most famous because the oysters here were all wild Girardot oysters. This kind of oyster originated from France. In some seafood markets, it was sold for $3 each. Not to mention that they were in a restaurant. Here, a plate of 2 such oysters was sold for $30, which was quite expensive. However, this kind of oyster was indeed the best. As long as one knew the industry, no one would say that it was expensive. Because if it was in a Michelin restaurant, it would only be more expensive. French oysters had always been known as aristocratic seafood and the dream food of the world's foodies. Girardot oysters were the Rolls-Royce of oysters. It was said that the best oysters needed 4 years of cultivation and had to go through 95 cultivation and refining processes before they could be put on the market. For such top oysters, there were only 12 of them. In France, they were sold for more than €550. This showed the price of this kind of oyster. The oysters in this restaurant were naturally not cultivated in this way. Selling 2 for $30 was a good price. Moreover, didn't it include some other things? However, she didn't expect that Jianghai wouldn't eat it, so for a moment, she was a little embarrassed. Don't you want to eat this? Pointing at the oyster plate in front of her with a fork, Sh20 Clive asked in a low voice. Seeing Sh20 Clive's appearance, Jianghai also felt her embarrassment, but he didn't know what to say for a while. In fact, the best way to resolve the awkwardness was for him to eat a piece, but the problem was that he really didn't want to eat this thing, so for a while, his personality was a little awkward, and he didn't know what to do. Hey, who did I see? Isn't this the owner of the largest manor in the Boston area? Are you here to participate in the exhibition today? However, just as Jianghai was hesitating, a slightly joking voice came from a distance, and then he saw several people coming out of the restaurant. Most of them were white people, and there were 2 black people among them. The man walking in front saw Jianghai and Sandy in front of him. The joking voice came from his mouth. Are you talking to me? Feeling that the other party should be talking to him, Jianghai turned his head and looked at the people here. Of course, you are famous, aren't you? Farm owner. Hearing Jianghai's puzzled voice, the man here said proudly. Oh, who are you? Hearing that the other party was indeed talking to him, Jianghai was stunned and asked curiously. You don't recognize me? I am from Cartwright Company. You should be here to participate in the livestock exhibition. Chapter 127. Mujan. Cartwright Company? Hearing the other party's words, Jianghai searched in his mind. Then he lightly smacked his hand. Seeing Jianghai's expression, the other party laughed. It seemed that he remembered. You know who I am? Thinking of this, the man looked down at Jianghai and asked. I don't know, I don't remember at all. If there's nothing else, please make way. I still have to eat with my friend. Shaking his head, Jianghai stared at the man's face and said with a serious expression. I don't know why you're smashing your fist. Forget it. You win. But it doesn't matter. If it weren't for our company, I'd like to see how you'd sell your 20,000 cows. Seeing Jianghai's reaction, the man couldn't help but feel like he was about to explode. People like him were all extremely self-centered. Jianghai's words of ignoring him made him even angrier than Jianghai standing up and slapping him. However, he had to consider the other party's identity. Although in his opinion, Jiang Hai was just a nouveau riche, a country bumpkin, this country bumpkin had something that could control everything in the United States, dollar. As the saying goes, people don't fight with officials. In the United States, ordinary people don't fight with the rich. Although he had some assets, compared to Jiang Hai's wealth, he was still far from it. It wasn't a wise choice to have a direct confrontation with him, so he took a deep breath and suppressed his anger. Then he threw out some harsh words and was about to leave. The people behind him didn't know what happened between him and Jiang Hai. But they weren't stupid. At this time, the most important thing was to keep their mouths shut. They should just quietly watch the show. What do my cows have to do with you, psycho? Hearing the other party's words, Jiang Hai naturally wasn't someone who was easy to talk to. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the man's body shook, but he didn't say anything else. Instead, he directly walked out of the restaurant. After these people left, SH-20 Clive looked at Jiang Hai in surprise. You have a grudge with Cartwright Company? You can say that. I raised some cows, and one day, they came to my farm to take away one of my cows. Naturally, I didn't want to. Then, there was a little conflict. Seeing that Shendi Clive was curious about this matter, Jiang Hai slowly explained the situation that day. Then you might really be in trouble. After hearing Jiang Hai's words, SH-20 Clive frowned. What do you mean? Jiang Hai looked at her when he heard Shendi Clive's words. Did she know about this company too? Your subordinates didn't stop you from clashing with them? Hearing Jiang Hai's words, SH-20 Clive didn't directly answer his question, but continued to ask. Hearing what she said, Jiang Hai thought for a moment. It seemed that Robbins was trying to persuade him. That's right. Although my family doesn't raise cows, after all, my father is a Western chef. No matter if it's French, Italian, or even English cuisine, steak is very important. So when I was young, I often went to Western restaurants, and I more or less heard about this matter. Seeing Jiang Hai nod, SH-20 Clive explained to Jiang Hai. This Cartwright Company is the largest beef broker in the few states around here. They don't produce cattle themselves, but they buy cattle from ranchers. Then, they buy the cattle at the price of the beef, and they sell it to Western restaurants and supermarkets to make a profit. They have a huge business network and connections. The Western restaurants in town have always used their beef. Looking at Jiang Hai, SH-20 Clive also introduced this huge company to him. To put it bluntly, they are just a middleman. If worst comes to worst, I'll just sell my beef directly. As for the Cartwright Company, Jiang Hai also investigated them. He knew that they were the largest beef broker in the area. But just like what Jiang Hai said, he was confident in his cattle, so he didn't need to sell his cattle through this company. You still don't understand. You still don't understand. If you go directly to the door and sell these beef cattle, then the boss will definitely be willing to do this company a favor. After all, they have signed an exclusive sales agreement. Secondly, who knows if there is any problem with your beef cattle, not to mention the national inspection. This thing is just a random inspection, it is not very reliable. Compared to some big companies, an independent customer like you, the probability of a problem is too high. If there is a problem and you don't admit it, then they will have to pay for it themselves. This is something they absolutely don't want to see, so no matter what the reason is, if you go against this company, then you have already lost half of the battle. Sandy sighed. It can be seen that she really wanted to make friends with Jiang Hai. Otherwise, it would be easy to hurt their relationship if they talked too much. Moreover, Jiang Hai really didn't seem to understand these things. Oh, don't worry. I've thought about what you said. You can make a decision after you taste my beef tonight. Hearing Shendi Clive's words, Jiang Hai couldn't help but be stunned. If what he said was true, it would be difficult to sell his 20,000 cattle. After all, business was business. Moreover, he didn't have anything like a favor. If his beef cattle were really similar to other people's cattle, then his 20,000 cattle would be very easy to lose. But thinking about it, Was his cattle the same as other people's cattle? Just based on the large range of marbled patterns, they were not the same thing. Moreover, Jiang Hai believed that the cattle raised by the grass planted with his own blood were not the same. Even if there were no marbled patterns, the taste would definitely not be worse than ordinary marbled beef. However, there was no proof now. Jiang Hai still felt that it would be better to let Shendiclive taste it personally. In fact, in this manner, the people who were most worried about the fate of the cattle were Jiang Hai, Luo Binci, and the others. After all, they had patted their chests and said that they would definitely raise a batch of good cattle for Jiang Hai. When Jiang Hai gang had a falling out with the Cartwright Company, they were also very worried. However, after killing the 2 cows, their worries disappeared because they believed that even if the cows were now, as long as they went to a national exhibition, they would be able to survive. It would also instantly make a name for itself. Was 20,000 a lot? Oh, they were afraid that it wouldn't be enough. This. Okay. Although Shendiclive was still hesitant, she and Jiang Hai had not known each other for a long time. That was why she did not want to say more. Moreover, she believed that Jiang Hai was not an arrogant person. After these few interactions, she had figured out Jiang Hai's character. The reason why he was so confident now must be because he had his own unique points. That was why she felt that she should eat Jiang Hai's beef at night first. After this incident, the matter of Jiang Hai not eating oysters was forgotten. After Sandy finished eating, Jiang Hai also went to pay for the meal. He was from Bing City, and people in Bing City had male chauvinism. He also had this habit. If he did not pay for the meal when he went out with a girl, he would feel uncomfortable. Today, Sandy was his guide, and he had never heard of a guide paying for a meal. Breakfast was an apology, and lunch was definitely on him. After paying the bill, both of them walked out of the restaurant and went to the parking lot. This afternoon, they had agreed to visit the universities here. The universities here were naturally Cambridge and Newton. However, these 2 places, although nominally belonged to Boston, they were actually part of Boston's metropolitan area. They were independent, and they had their own government. Just like Winthrop, they were part of the county-level area. It's also a bit far from the place where Jiang Hai and the others ate. After getting in the car, Jiang Hai started the engine and drove towards Cambridge City according to Xanthi's directions. The first place they want to visit is Harvard University. Jiang Hai was quite familiar with Harvard University. It was one of the top 3 universities in the world. Harvard, Harvard University, Oxford, Milan College of Economics, and Stanford, Slovak Tank Corps Institute of Fashion Design. Just kidding, in fact, Jiang Hai had no interest in Harvard. After all, he went to a low-level university. So, he didn't have any interest in the university, studying, and so on. However, as Katie Clive said, when you arrive at a place, of course, you have to see the landmarks of this place and understand the history of this place. Only then can you be considered to have truly visited this place, not to mention that Jiang Hai had settled here. Therefore, Jiang Hai did not refuse. Whether he liked it or not, it would not be wrong to go and see it. However, when he was driving to Harvard, he saw a huge square not far away from Boston. At this time, there were many pickup trucks parked in this square. There were also a lot of cattle, sheep, horses, and other large livestock. After all, Jiang Hai raised cattle. When he passed by, he couldn't help but take a look. When he saw the English words, Massachusetts Grazing Exhibition, hanging on the front door, he couldn't help but be stunned. Massachusetts Grazing Exhibition. I seem to know it. Looking at these words, Jiang Hai whispered. He remembered that after he had a falling out with the Cartwright Company, he once asked the cowboys under him if there were any recent cattle and sheep exhibitions. They seemed to have said that there were a total of 2 recent exhibitions, one of which was in Massachusetts and the other one was in the East. Because he was confident in his cattle, Jiang Hai directly ordered to participate in the East. However, Jiang Hai remembered that according to their words, the Massachusetts exhibition was in January. It should be just after the new year. It seems that the one being held now should be the Massachusetts grazing exhibition. Interested? Then let's go and see it together. Seeing Jiang Hai's eyes looking outside, Sandy's voice also came. Chapter 128. Wow, there are a lot of things here. Looking at the animals stored in the tents around him, Jiang Hai said with some surprise. Of course, young man, but this is only a grazing exhibition in Massachusetts. If it's in the East or even the whole country, it would be even bigger. Hearing his words, a person brushing a horse's mane in a nearby booth also smiled and said, "Haha." Hearing the other party's words, Jiang Hai nodded kindly and continued to stroll around here. Is this your first time attending a grazing exhibition like this? Looking at Jiang Hai's curious gaze, Shenty Clive, who followed him in, also followed behind him with a smile on her face. Well, yes. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai didn't think too much and answered directly. Now his eyes are a little short. Although this grazing exhibition is only in Massachusetts, the scale is a little beyond his expectations. In the past, he had only heard of grazing exhibitions, but this was the first time he had seen one with his own eyes. He had originally thought that grazing exhibitions that covered an entire state would probably only have a dozen or so booths, or maybe even 20 booths. After all, Massachusetts itself was a small state. It's a small state that is difficult to see clearly on the map of the United States, but when he came here, he realized that he was a little too naive. The entire venue covers an area of about 4 square kilometers, which is 2 kilometers horizontally and 2 kilometers vertically. Just like the Chinese character Tian, it is divided into 4 areas, namely the Cattle Exhibition Hall, the Horse Exhibition Hall, the Sheep Exhibition Hall, and the Supporting Exhibition Hall. Jiang Hai entered the Horse Exhibition Hall. As soon as he walked in, he found that there were at least 30 or 40 individual exhibition halls. Of course, this was not a game exhibition or a food price exhibition. Those exhibitions were held indoors, and models were invited. However, this exhibition was outdoors. Although it was called an individual exhibition hall, it was actually a separate stable. Many horses were kept in the stable for people to choose. Of course, there were also some that were not for sale, such as the horse of the man who talked to Jiang Hai just now. It was a very good horse, a pure white purebred horse. In England, it was used as a horse for the royal guards. The bloodline certificate hanging next to it was quite complete, and it had even participated in a dressage competition. The front of the stable was connected to a TV, which showed the horse's performance during the competition. If such a horse was sold in its prime, it would not be rare for it to be sold for millions of dollars. But it was obvious that the man wouldn't kill the goose that laid the golden eggs. He was mainly selling the offspring of this horse. He would find another pure-blooded horse and breed the offspring to be 1-year-old ponies. If the offspring were in good condition, they could be sold for hundreds of thousands of dollars. Even if the offspring weren't in good condition, they could still be sold for tens of thousands of dollars. They were much more expensive than regular horses. Jiang Hai didn't know much about horses. He was only here to watch the fun. After all, his family's Xia was still in a state of free range. There was no other way. After buying the horse, he didn't have time to domesticate it. In his opinion, riding a horse wasn't an easy thing to do. It needed to be learned alone. Back then, Luo Binci and the others were very busy, so he didn't have the heart to learn. But now, looking at these horses, he had the urge to go back and ride them. Of course, even if he wanted to ride them, he would not ride them now. Jiang Hai planned to wait until spring came and the flowers bloomed, then he would learn to ride a horse. Jiang Hai believed that with the horse he had fed for so long in his blood, if he wanted to ride a horse, this guy should not resist. While thinking, Jiang Hai and Shendy Clive walked out of the stable. Although Jiang Hai was very curious about Mu Muzhan, he was mainly curious about the cow. Compared to a cowboy, a horse was naturally a very good thing. But for Jiang Hai, a horse, to put it bluntly, was just a means of transportation. He was not a professional cowboy, so he was not very interested in horses. The most important thing was that the horses here were really not cheap. Walking with Sandy along the way, they walked past the stable and entered the largest and most crowded market next to it, the cattle exhibition hall. As soon as they walked in, the smell of cattle rushed into Jiang Hai's nose. Even Sandy couldn't help but cover her nose with her hand, let alone Jiang Hai. Cough cough, it's so choking. Turning his head, Jiang Hai was choked by the smell. He couldn't help but frown and said carefully. Although the smell here was not as strong as his own cattle shed, it was definitely not bad. Hee, you are a manor owner. You can't even stand the smell of cattle. Looking at Jiang Hai's appearance, Sandy next to him smiled and took out a handkerchief from her small bag and handed it to Jiang Hai. Jiang Hai immediately took the handkerchief and covered his nose. Only then did he breathe a sigh of relief. The handkerchief was very fragrant. Jiang Hai also knew that this was a man-made fragrance. It was not good for the human body, but smelling this smell was better than smelling cattle farts. So I almost never enter our cattle shed. Even if I go in, I have to wear a mask. After taking a deep breath, Jiang Hai finally calmed down. Then he looked at the smiling Clive and shrugged. You still need to adapt early. Although Uncle Robbins is a good person, it is your own business after all. You have to know what to do. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Clive said with a chuckle. Of course. By the way, did you know? Some people say that the main reason for global warming is that cows fart too much. The farts of a few cows in a year are almost as much as the exhaust of a car. After hearing Clive's words, Jiang Hai smiled a little embarrassedly. He was a little embarrassed to be criticized by a beautiful woman, so he changed the topic. However, the change of topic was not ordinary. Hee. Clive didn't know how to respond to Jiang Hai's words. Should he talk about cattle farts? Stop joking. Fortunately, Clive knew Jiang Hai's personality, so he didn't care. To put it bluntly, Jiang Hai's personality was still a little chinibu. At least, he didn't show that he had a superior EQ. It seemed that although the true dragon's soul essence could strengthen his physique and memory, it didn't change his EQ. Seeing that Clive wasn't interested in talking about cattle farts, Jiang Hai didn't have much interest in talking about it. Jiang Hai also curled his lips. He didn't feel that there was anything wrong with saying such things at this time, but it was a pity that he couldn't show off his knowledge. Then he covered his nose and walked into the cattle exhibition hall. When he first walked in, the smell was really choking, but after a short while, it was much better. The cattle exhibition hall was much more lively than the horse exhibition hall. There were more than 100 booths, but most of the booths were for private farms. There were only a few cows in total, but there were all kinds of different styles. In addition to the Angus cattle that Jiang Hai was very familiar with, there were many other types of beef cattle. There were Piedmont, Limousin, Simmental, Charolais, Hayford, and so on. In addition to beef cattle, there were also dairy cows and draft cattle. Although cattle were no longer used for farming in the United States, some people were still willing to collect draft cattle. Therefore, the cattle here were really diverse. Looking at the cattle in front of him, Jiang Hai also chatted with Clive. While looking at the variety of cattle in front of him, suddenly, a cow entered his eyes. Yes, it was a cow, not a herd. This was because there was only one cow in the exhibition hall. This exhibition hall was definitely not small, and it wouldn't be a problem to hold a dozen cows. But at this time, there was only one cow. But even so, this cow shed looked a lot more pocket-sized. Looking at the cow, Jiang Hai slowly walked over. This cow was very big and very tall, even taller than Jiang Hai. Its body length was also much longer than an ordinary cow. Jiang Hai looked at it and saw that it was about 3 meters tall. Its entire body was covered in thick fur, and there was a pair of small horns on its head. Although the horns were not big for its size, they were unusually sharp. Its pair of eyes stared warily at everyone, looking here and there. Is this American bison? Seeing this huge guy, Jiang Hai was stunned for a moment. Then, he asked Sh-20 Clive suspiciously, because he seemed to have seen this guy in the zoo before. It was obviously not an ordinary domestic cow, so it must be a bison. It seems to be. Sh-20 Clive didn't specialize in cattle, but she was a primary school teacher. She led the children to the zoo, so naturally, she needed to explain. Looking at the cow in front of her, she was also a little uncertain. You guys really have good taste. This is indeed a American bison, but it's not wild. The wild ones are all in Yellowstone Park. This one is an experimental animal that our school has raised privately. This time, we came to the exhibition mainly to raise funds to domesticate this kind of bison. Just when Jiang Hai and Sh-20 Clive were a little uncertain, a young man walked over from the side. Compared to the other people in the exhibition hall, who were either in suits or jeans, this person's clothes were much more ordinary. It was just a down jacket with a school emblem on his chest. Jiang Hai didn't know what the emblem represented, but Sh-20 Clive did. Hearing this person's words, she took the initiative to nod. Are you students from B City University? Sh-20 Clive looked at the person in front of her and asked curiously. Oh, yes, we are in ecology and evolution. Our research topic is the large-scale domestication of wild animals. Hearing Xanthi's words, the student immediately smiled and answered. It was an honor to answer a beauty's question. Chapter 129. Boston University, or BU for short, was founded in 1839. Most people's first impression of it would be that it was a public university, but that was not the case. It was actually a private university, and it was one of the top private universities in the world. It was also the third largest private university in the United States. It had a high academic reputation in the world, and it had always been in the top 100 in the world and the top 50 in North America. It was ranked 32nd in the world. It had produced 6 Nobel Prize winners and 22 Pulitzer Prize winners. The most famous alumnus was probably Martin Luther King, who loved to dream. Don't think that just because this university had produced so many Pulitzer Prize winners, it was just a journalism university. In fact, journalism wasn't a very important subject in this university. The subjects they were most proficient in were business, engineering, economics, and biomedical engineering. This subject could even be ranked in the top 10 in the United States. In the evaluation, ecology, evolution, and systems biology were ranked 6th in the United States. Of course, this had nothing to do with Jiang Hai. He did not have any interest in studying. However, he was very interested in this research because he knew that even domesticated beef cattle could not be compared to wild cattle. Firstly, there was a huge difference in weight. The heaviest bison in the United States could reach a ton. This was something that domestic beef cattle couldn't compare to. Secondly, this type of bison, even if it was domesticated, was still a bison. It was just like the wild boar in China. Even if it was domesticated, it was still a wild boar. Selling it would be expensive. Perhaps the price might not be high in the United States, but if it was sold in China, it would be very expensive. Once he said that it was wild beef, the already high price would at least double. At this time, Xanthi Clive was already a little tired. Compared to Jiang Hai, it was obvious that the big boy opposite him was more speechless. It was true that she was a teacher, but it did not mean that a teacher would like academic questions. Although she was not like those vain girls, who would open their mouths to talk about branded clothes, good makeup products, jewelry, shoes, and so on, she was willing to listen to some romantic topics. Jiang Hai's ** tea was already cold enough. But this young man spoke even more coldly. What DNA, what helix, what chromosomal pairs, what XY? She listened to him in confusion, but this young man clearly talked about the field that he was best at, and there was no end to it. It would be rude to just walk away, so she hesitated for a while and decided to follow Jiang Hai. However, when she saw that Jiang Hai was looking at the cow, she deliberately walked over. Seeing that the goddess in front of them had only said a few words and then returned to the yellow man's side, the students here couldn't help but be a little speechless. There was no other way. People like them who engaged in research were also a kind of otaku. Obviously, they were not very good at observing women. Although Jiang Hai had such a character, at least he was more familiar with Xanthi Clive. Hey, isn't this the great manor owner? What's wrong? Are you interested in this cow? Unfortunately, it's not for sale. Just as the big boy did not know what to say, a few figures walked over from a distance. The person leading them was the guy Jiang Hai had seen in the restaurant today. He was from the Carlight Company. Beside him, in addition to the few people they met at noon, there were a few people wearing the same clothes as the boy in front of Jiang Hai. From the school badge on their chest, it could be seen that they were all from B City University. Our company invested in the development of this cow. In other words, this cow belongs to our company. Look at the surrounding cow sheets. 80% of them belong to our company. Unfortunately, there is no place for you here. What's the matter? You're so old that you can't sell it? Looking at Jiang Hai, the man said with a sour face. What a pity. Although the cows here belong to your company, they don't seem to belong to you. His cows all belong to him. Are you standing here and talking like this because you envy him? Hearing his words, Jiang Hai didn't have time to speak, but Cindy Clive, who was beside him, had already stood up, a trace of anger flashing across her face. From her point of view, this fellow had come to find fault with them, and it was somewhat baffling. Jiang Hai didn't even know him, but he kept coming here to make his presence known. His words were so sour. Who was he trying to convince? After being insulted by Jiang Hai, he still came here to show off. She really didn't know where his sense of superiority came from. In terms of size, he wasn't as good as Jiang Hai, and in terms of money, he was even worse. Jiang Hai had a manor worth hundreds of millions of dollars. And this guy was just a worker, so why was he showing off here? Even SH-20 Clive couldn't stand it anymore. She walked to the front and said to the man. I envy him. What do I envy him for? He's just a country bumpkin. Hearing Xanthi's words, the man couldn't help but be speechless for a while. After he finished speaking, he whispered something in a low voice. But this sentence was heard by Jiang Hai. Jiang Hai was a pure Northeastern man. Northeastern men were particular about fighting, not quarreling. This guy's words were originally sour, which made Jiang Hai a little unhappy. And now, this guy actually dared to talk about him in front of his face. How could he endure it? Jiang Hai's temper wasn't very good, so he took a big stride and directly arrived in front of this person. In front of everyone's eyes, Jiang Hai grabbed this guy's collar and directly lifted him up. Feeling the strength of Jiang Hai's steel-like arm, this guy was somewhat stunned. He grabbed Jiang Hai's arm with one hand while his other hand was constantly waving in the air. You, what are you doing? Put me down, security, security. Hearing his exclamation, several security guards, who were watching in the distance, quickly ran over at this time. As for the researchers and students around him, they were a little confused. It was not an exaggeration to say that these students were straight-A students. However, straight-A students were more focused on their studies and not on fighting. When they saw such a thing, they could not wait to avoid it. How could they go forward? He called me a country bumpkin, I heard it, can I sue him? Jiang Hai looked at the guy who kept struggling in his hand, sneered, then turned his head and said to SH-20 Clive. It seems that you can't, but if you teach him a lesson, you probably only need to pay some medical expenses. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Xanthi also smiled and said slowly, but although she said that, she winked at Jiang Hai. Oh, I see. It's a pity that I lack everything but money. Staring at the person in front of him, Jiang Hai sighed. In the United States, where everything can be related to race, it's not illegal to call someone a country bumpkin. Jiang Hai really felt that he was a dog. But to teach a lesson to this snobbish guy, it wasn't as simple as what Sandy said. What she said was more for this guy to hear. She winked at Jiang Hai, telling him that if Jiang Hai really hit him, then it might not be as simple as what she said. Jiang Hai didn't think that Sandy would be able to teach him a lesson. After all, Jiang Hai just got his green card. If he gets involved in any violent conflict, it won't be good for Jiang Hai. Sir, please calm down. Let go of the person in your hand, otherwise, we will call the police. At this time, the security guards over there also quickly ran over, but they didn't dare to act rashly. The security guards in the United States believe that work is work, life is life. Work is only for making money, and it's not worth it to lose your life for money. So after these people surrounded Jiang Hai, they didn't say much, they just persuaded Jiang Hai to let go. Boring. Looking at the security guards around him, Jiang Hai curled his lips. He originally thought that these guys would directly rush over. Now it seems that these guys have no guts, but he didn't want to make a big deal out of it. He directly let go of the man and pushed him away. The man was in midair, so where could he borrow strength from? He was directly pushed to the ground by Jiang Hai, falling heavily on his butt. You barbarian, you country bumpkin, I want to sue you. Feeling the pain in his butt, the most important thing is that he lost all his face this time. At this time, the man couldn't help but jump up, covering his painful butt with one hand, and shouted while jumping. Whatever. Jiang Hai just pushed him like this, it's not even a slight injury, the police won't care about it. You are a barbarian, you are a butcher, you yellow. Cough, as long as I am still in the company, you can't sell a cow, don't think about it. Seeing Jiang Hai's indifferent look, the guy couldn't help but curse, but halfway through, he just came out with the word, Yi Lu, and he stopped in time because he remembered that this guy just asked the beautiful woman beside him if what he said was racial discrimination. Originally, country bumpkin didn't count, but if he finished this sentence, then it would count. At the same time, he also saw the coldness in Jiang Hai's eyes, which made him stop his words in time and attack Jiang Hai's cow. In his opinion, Jiang Hai's cow is good, but it is destined that this cow can't be sold after offending him. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai's mouth couldn't help but twitch. Can't sell? That's if it's of the same quality as this guy's cow, it can't be sold. But is Jiang Hai's cow of the same quality as him? Don't joke, Jiang Hai's cow, just looking at the meat, even the Japanese Wagyu cattle may not be comparable to him, let alone these free-range cows in the United States. Do you want to bet? Squinting, Jiang Hai looked at the guy in front of him and said with disdain. Chapter 130. Bet? What bet? Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the man shut his mouth for the time being and asked hesitantly. Let's bet on whose cow will be the winner of the New York Livestock Exhibition in April. If your company wins, I'll personally lose $1 million to you. If my cow wins, then I'm sorry, you'll lose $1 million to me. If you don't have the money to pay, then you'll have to kneel down and kowtow to me 3 times. Jiang Hai smiled disdainfully at the man in front of him. $1 million? Hearing these words, many of the onlookers gasped. Well, they didn't think that the bet would be so big. Many of the onlookers nearby were ordinary farm owners. Although they weren't considered poor farmers in the United States, they were still considered middle class. After deducting the taxes they had to pay every year, it would be good if they had $40,000 or $50,000 left. Even if they made $50,000 a year, it would take 20 years to earn back $1 million. Ever since the United States started to control the exchange rate of the dollar, there had been no more problems with inflation. It was very likely that the value of $1 million now would be the same as 10 or 20 years later. In other words, it was pure profit. Thinking of this, these people all looked at the Cartwright Company's employee. In their eyes, this $1 million was pure profit for Cartwright Company. After all, they had been the winner of the New York Livestock Exhibition for 3 consecutive years. This was practically free money. Obviously, they didn't think that Jiang Hai could raise more than a middleman like Cartwright. But this employee didn't think so. He was very cautious. First, he was tempted by the $1 million. Second, he was worried about what he would do if he lost. He definitely couldn't afford $1 million, and the company definitely wouldn't pay $1 million for him. But if he had to kneel down and kowtow, he wouldn't be willing no matter what. In a democratic country like the United States, although the thing people worshiped the most was money, they wouldn't be willing to give up their self-esteem and kneel down and kowtow unless they were forced to. Therefore, he was still struggling. Looking at Jiang Hai's eyes, he was hesitant and hesitant. "Hey, Paul, what are you hesitating for? This guy is giving you money for free. There's no reason for you not to accept it." "That's right. You're too timid." "Young man, if he doesn't want to bet with you, I'll bet with you. 1 million. How long will it take you to earn that much money? What's there to hesitate about?" Seeing him hesitating, some people who were familiar with him started to shout loudly. Hearing these people's words, Paul licked his lips with hesitation as his eyes turned firm at once. "Okay, I'll bet with you." Looking at Jiang Hai in front of him, Paul shouted. Hearing that, Jiang Hai shrugged too. It was fine for him to gamble. He wasn't doing it for the $1 million, but to prove himself. This guy dared to be so arrogant in front of him. If he didn't step on him, who would he step on? After this person agreed, some busybodies pulled over a lawyer on the spot. After all, this was an exhibition, and it was also for sales. Since it was for sales, a contract had to be signed. When signing the contract, the lawyer must be present. Now that Jiang Hai and this guy named Paul had a bet, naturally, the lawyer had to sign the agreement to take effect. After the lawyer came to ask for the opinions of both sides, he didn't say much and directly drafted an agreement. Here, it can't be called a bet, it can only be called an agreement. Then, Jiang Hai and this person signed their respective agreements. The two agreed that if the Cartwright Company's cattle won the top bid at the New York Livestock Exhibition in April this year, Jiang Hai would give Paul K $1 million, effective immediately. If the cattle from Jiang Hai's manor won the top bid, Paul K would give Jiang Hai $1 million, effective immediately. There were 3 copies of the agreement. Jiang Hai and K each held one, and the lawyer kept the other. After everything was done, Jiang Hai and Sh20 Clive didn't want to continue looking. After all, according to Paul K, 80% of the shops here belonged to his company. Jiang Hai didn't want to be pointed at here and unable to buy anything. Rather than that, it was better to just leave. So, Jiang Hai didn't hesitate and directly left. After the two walked out of the exhibition hall, Jiang Hai originally wanted to go home directly. But when he looked at the time, it was only 2 in the afternoon. It was still early. If he went back now, he didn't know if Luo Binsi and the others had returned. So, his originally extinguished idea of going to see a school was reignited. Anyway, we have nothing to do now. Let's go see the nearby schools. Jiang Hai glanced at Sh20 Clive and said to her. When she heard Jiang Hai's words, Sandy, who was originally a little worried about whether Jiang Hai would lose, couldn't help but be taken aback. It seems that you don't care about your bet this time. Okay, let's go. Sh20 Clive gently shook her head and smiled at Jiang Hai. Then the two stepped into the car parked at the entrance of the exhibition and headed to Cambridge. Cambridge was a city, and though it was, in a broad sense, in Boston, it was a very different city from Boston, geographically and in the reports of the city, opposite Boston on the other side of the Charles River. However, although this city wasn't big, and its population was only about 100,000, it was quite famous in the United States and even the world. This was because there were 2 universities here, 2 super universities. One of them was the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Perhaps everyone was a little confused when they said this name. Massachusetts, some people in China also called it Massachusetts. And this state's Institute of Technology was the legendary Massachusetts Institute of Technology, the most powerful existence in science and engineering. The other university is Harvard University, a giant in the education world. Other universities can't wait to let the world know about the President of the United States, but Harvard University has produced 8 presidents of the United States. Among them, the current president is from Harvard University. The number of Nobel Prize winners here is also in the hundreds of thousands or millions. Famous alumni, such as Bill Gates and Roosevelt, have all studied here. Of course, everyone knows that Bill Gates is not a good student, but he is famous. Driving, not long after, the two arrived at this famous university. But to be honest, when walking into this university, Jiang Hai did not feel anything different. It may be because he really has no love for learning, or it may be because it is winter, and there is snow everywhere. Of course, it may also be because it is the holiday now, and there are not many students in the university. So, what he has read in novels before, such as the overwhelming academic atmosphere, the soul-shaking ethereal school, and the touching cultural accomplishment, there are none at all. Jiang Hai just walked around and saw some landmark buildings at the same time. He used his mobile phone to take a photo with them and send it to his circle of friends. Recently, he almost didn't go on QQ much. He used WeChat more often, and his WeChat friends, there are not many. In addition to his friends, there are only a few junior high school and high school classmates that he hardly contacted. In total, there are only a dozen people. It looks really lonely. Phew, we should go too. After taking the last photo, Jiang Hai couldn't help but take a look at the time. Although he didn't like to visit the university, since he visited, he should visit the places that should be visited. So unknowingly, although it was just walking around the main campus, it took him nearly 2 hours. There is no other way. Harvard is really not small. The entire campus area is 4,882 acres. Just the main campus alone is 224 acres. They walked around the main campus for nearly an hour. They just roughly looked at the other places, and the sky was already a little dark. Looking at the time on his mobile phone, it was already 4:30 in the afternoon. Jiang Hai exhaled a breath of hot air and said to Xanthi Clay. Just now, he had received a call from Luo Binsi, and they had already returned. As for the task that Jiang Hai gave them, the lobster, there was naturally no problem. Today, their luck was quite good. Not only did they catch the lobster that Jiang Hai wanted, but they also caught a lot of prawns, crabs, and other things. This also allowed Jiang Hai's fishermen to have a preliminary understanding of Jiang Hai's fishing ground. When natural resources were extremely scarce outside, Jiang Hai's fishing ground was really a paradise. However, Jiang Hai was not the only one who wanted to enter the paradise. Luo Binsi also told Jiang Hai that when they were patrolling today, they saw a fishing boat in the distance, but when the fishing boat saw Luo Binsi, it quickly fled. However, it also reminded Jiang Hai that it seems that someone has been eyeing his fishing ground. Although it is possible to use a boat to patrol, after all, it takes too long and it is easy for others to take advantage of the loopholes. After Jiang Hai answered the phone, he was already thinking about buying a helicopter and a small agricultural plane. Even if it is just for patrolling, it is worth buying this thing. Of course, even if he wants to buy it, it will have to be tomorrow. He still has guests today. Okay. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Shendi Clive, who had just helped Jiang Hai take a photo, also smiled and said. Then, she walked behind Jiang Hai and walked out of the school. But just as the two walked out of the school gate, suddenly, a somewhat reckless figure rushed from the street in the distance. Jiang Hai's reaction was extremely fast. He dodged immediately, but after dodging, he remembered that Shendi Clive was still by his side, so he immediately pulled her, but he was still a bit late. Although he pulled her body over, this person still bumped into his shoulder. Chapter 131. Hey, watch your steps. Looking at Sandy being hit, Jiang Hai, as a man, naturally shouted at the person on the other side. However, that person didn't turn around. Instead, he ran forward at a faster speed. Something's wrong, check if your phone and wallet are still there. Looking at the speed of this little guy, Jiang Hai narrowed his eyes and immediately said to SH-20, Clive. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Sandy reacted at this time. She immediately reached into her coat pocket. Sure enough, the wallet that should have been in her coat pocket had disappeared. Damn guy, you go and drive, I'll chase after him. Seeing that this guy was really a thief, Jiang Hai secretly cursed. He was really unlucky. It was not easy to go shopping with a girl, but the first thing he did was to meet the guy from the Cartwright Company, who provoked him. He was targeted by a thief when he was walking out of the university. It was really F***ed up. At the moment, he was bold. He didn't say much. After throwing the car key directly to SH-20, Clive, who was still in a daze, he chased in the direction the thief left. How fast was Jiang Hai? In the words of the NBA assistant coach who tested him, he was as fast as lightning. Of course, this was nonsense, but if he wanted to, it would not be a problem for him to participate in the Olympic 100-meter sprint final. After a few minutes, he had already rushed around the corner. As soon as he turned the corner, he saw the guy just now. At this time, this guy was in front of the roadside trash bin, looking for SH-20, Clive's wallet that he had just stolen. He happened to turn around and saw Jiang Hai rushing over. He was shocked. He didn't have time to think about it. He stuffed the wallet into his tattered shirt, and then ran away crazily. Who the F***ck? Looking at his movements, Jiang Hai couldn't help but curse. Then, he continued to accelerate and rushed forward. The distance between the two was quickly narrowing, but just as he was about to catch the guy turned and went into a small alley just now. As previously mentioned, the Boston area was the oldest city. Soon after the European colonists came to North America, they established the Boston area here. Therefore, the urban area here was very narrow. It could be said that the roads here were the most difficult to walk in the metropolitan cities in the United States. Although Cambridge was not considered the urban area of Boston, the situation here was similar. It was winter now. The government would clear the snow and ice on the main roads, but not on some small roads. When Jiang Hai also turned a corner and stepped into this small alley, he almost fell down in an instant. Because at this time, there was a thick layer of ice on the ground of this small alley. This ice was not pure and transparent, but colorful. There were all kinds of garbage on it. In some corners, there were a lot of human or animal excrement. As soon as Jiang Hai walked into this small alley, he subconsciously wanted to go out. It can be imagined how disgusting it would be to fall down here, but when he looked at the thief who was moving quickly in front of him, he couldn't help but grit his teeth. Damn it. If it was another time, he would have caught him long ago. He wouldn't be in such a difficult situation now. But Jiang Hai didn't want to let this guy go. Looking at the sky that was about to turn dark, Jiang Hai secretly cursed. He moved his feet and ran in this small alley. Fortunately, Jiang Hai usually doesn't like to wear formal clothes, so his shoes now are military whips bought at the outdoor goods store. This kind of shoe has a strong grip. Although running on the ice is still very slippery, at least if you are careful, you won't fall so easily. But the kid on the opposite side is obviously used to such a scene. He didn't care about the garbage on the ground or even the excrement. He ran out of the small alley quickly. When Jiang Hai chased out of the small alley, this guy had already pulled away a lot. If it weren't for Jiang Hai's good enough eyesight, he would have been unable to catch this guy's figure. But fortunately, he finally left that damn alley. Jiang Hai instantly ran and chased the thin figure in the distance. The two of them, one chasing and one fleeing, ran for about 20 minutes. The kid's stamina was finally about to run out, and his speed was getting slower and slower. If he wasn't very familiar with the surrounding terrain, he might have been caught by Jiang Hai long ago. Jiang Hai also stepped on the ice and followed him all the way. As he turned into a small alley again, Jiang Hai also followed in. But after entering, Jiang Hai couldn't help but smile because this small alley is dead. At this time, he saw this figure running quickly to the innermost part of the alley, and Jiang Hai also breathed a sigh of relief. He slowly tidied up his clothes, stepped on the hard ice, and walked towards this figure. Still running? Why are you running? Give me back my wallet. Looking at the thief in front of him, Jiang Hai chuckled and said in English as he walked. Seeing Jiang Hai's figure coming over, the thief couldn't help but be a little scared. His hands clutched his clothes tightly. Every time Jiang Hai took a step forward, he couldn't help but take a step back. Not long after, he was already leaning against the cold wall at the entrance of the alley. Jiang Hai also walked in front of him and looked at him condescendingly. On his small face, only a pair of big eyes were staring at Jiang Hai, but there was no sign of weakness or fear. Hey, kid, you won't cry until you see the coffin, right? Give it to me. Seeing that the thief didn't return the wallet in such a situation, Jiang Hai couldn't help but smack his lips. He wasn't a good-tempered person. Without saying anything, his right hand instantly grabbed the thief, but the thief was flexible enough. He bent down and used the sliding force of the ice to instantly slip under Jiang Hai's legs. But when he wanted to run again, Jiang Hai directly grabbed his collar with his left hand and lifted him up. When he caught him, Jiang Hai was a little surprised because this thief looked about 1.6 meters tall. Maybe because it was winter and he was wearing a lot of clothes, he didn't look too light. But when Jiang Hai lifted him up, he was stunned for a moment because this thief really seemed to be too light, only about 60 or 70 pounds. This height and weight made Jiang Hai a little surprised, but it only surprised him for a moment. Then he was ready to look for the wallet. Bang, 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 bang. However, this thief didn't seem to admit defeat so easily. Although he didn't make any sound, his body kept struggling, especially his legs. He kept kicking the door next to the alley, making a harsh sound. Just as Jiang Hai was about to take out the wallet, the door on the other side was opened. And at the same time, it wasn't just this door that opened. There were more than a dozen doors that opened at the same time. Then from the door, 20 or 30 people came out. These people were both men and women. No matter if it was a man or a woman, they were all dressed like the child in Jiang Hai's hands. They were all tattered, and the men were basically dirty. As for the women, some of the older ones were much cleaner. At least there was no black ash on their faces, and their hair was combed. Some of the younger ones were basically not much different from the boys. When they saw Jiang Hai and this person, a trace of panic flashed in their eyes, but after the panic, they calmed down. The women didn't seem to see this scene and turned back to the room. The remaining 13 men surrounded Jiang Hai. Some of them even took out switchblades from their pockets and looked at Jiang Hai with an unfriendly face. From the time these people came out to Jiang Hai, they didn't say a word. But Jiang Hai understood what these people meant. Since Jiang Hai came, then they had no intention of letting Jiang Hai go. Hey, it's still a gang. Looking at these people in front of him, Jiang Hai didn't dare to be careless. After all, these people were holding weapons in their hands. Judging from their faces, these people weren't very old. They were basically around 20 years old. This was the time when people were most reckless. Although Jiang Hai's physical fitness was good, he still had to be careful. Come on. Throwing the thief in his hand aside, Jiang Hai looked down and found that his side was really clean. There wasn't even a wooden board. It seemed that he could only fight with his bare hands. Seeing Jiang Hai's actions, the men here looked at each other. The two youngest men standing at the front were pushed out first. These two guys didn't have weapons in their hands. They also knew that the purpose of being pushed out was to test Jiang Hai's level. So after looking at each other, they didn't say much and directly rushed towards Jiang Hai. If it was the old Jiang Hai, he might be a little flustered, but don't forget. Recently, he had been learning martial arts from Biyao, and he practiced almost every day. Coupled with his strong physical fitness, he didn't think much of an attack like this. He casually lifted his leg and kicked the chest of the boy on his right. The huge impact caused the boy to stagnate in the air for a moment, then he flew out and smashed into the door not far away. As for the other boy, he was in a much worse state than him. After Jiang Hai kicked the person on the left, he directly grabbed the clothes of the person on the right and threw him straight towards the people holding the switchblade. When these people saw this scene, they were stunned for a moment. They subconsciously put away their switchblades. After all, they didn't want to hurt their own people. However, the result of this was that they were all knocked down by the young man who threw them. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Jiang Hai took a big stride and went towards the people who didn't have a switchblade in their hands. He wanted to pick the weakest among them. Chapter 132. Then, he squatted down and dodged the opponent's fist. Then, he used 2 more nest fists and directly hit the stomach. Then, he jumped up and used a knee strike and a whip kick. The 2 people standing at the front instantly fell to the ground and lost their ability to fight. After landing, he kicked a person's calf and used the ice to sweep this person down. Then, he took a step forward and grabbed a person. He pulled him back and used his elbow to hit the person's jaw. Then, he used his body as a cushion to block the second wave of attacks from the people around him. Then, he threw another person over his shoulder and blocked the opponent's fist. Then, he closed in an uppercut, followed by a chop to the throat. Then, he threw another person over his shoulder into the crowd. While he suppressed a few people, he rushed to the others and hit the throat with a hand knife. Then, he stepped on the feet and used the hardness of the military whip to kick the opponent's knee. Then, he grabbed the opponent's head and used a knee strike to kill another person. Then, he moved into the arms of another person and used his elbow to hit the back of the opponent's head. At the same time, he used his knee to hit the opponent's stomach. There was a huge difference between those who had learned fighting techniques and those who hadn't. If Jiang Hai had not learned martial arts, he would have been able to deal with these people. If they did not have weapons, Jiang Hai would have been able to take a few hits. However, in the situation where the opponent had weapons, he was much more passive. After all, although his body was at the limit of a human's body, there would still be 2 holes in his body if he was hit. However, now that he had such skills, Jiang Hai's self-confidence was extremely inflated. While he was trying to think of a way to make the people with switchblades unable to come forward, he had already rushed to the other side, where there were also unarmed people. There were a total of 13 people here, 4 of them were armed with switchblades, and 9 of them were not. 2 of them were taken care of by him, and 7 of them were still alive. The remaining 7 people, under Jiang Hai's attack, were swept away like a whirlwind, instantly falling to the ground. After all, the other party took the initiative to look for trouble, and they were also armed. Jiang Hai wasn't going to be soft-hearted. Although it was the same as the last time, it was a deadly blow, but it was definitely not light. These people who were hit in the face were destined to be covered in blood. Their nose bones and facial bones would definitely be broken. Jiang Hai didn't hold back too much even if he hit them in other positions, although he didn't hit them to the extent of rupturing their internal organs. However, with his immense strength, it was not a problem for him to break some bones. At the very least, he had to ensure that they completely lost their ability to fight. Of course, after this battle, these guys would probably have to lie in the hospital for at least a month. The people who had been knocked down by Jiang Hai lay on the ground and covered their wounds. However, they didn't curse. They just covered their wounds and let out low growls. I didn't expect them to be tough guys. Looking at these people, Jiang Hai tidied up his clothes and said softly. At this time, the people who were first thrown by Jiang Hai, the 4 people who had weapons in their hands, also got up. It was so lively just now, but in fact, Jiang Hai only took about 10 seconds to deal with these people. After all, Jiang Hai's speed was not ordinary. When he dealt with these people, the people on the other side had just gotten up. This time, only facing these 4 guys, Jiang Hai felt a lot more confident in his heart. However, the weapons in their hands would always be a little troublesome, so he rushed over first and kicked away the switchblade in a guy's hand. At the same time, he stepped on the wrist of a person who hadn't gotten up yet. The huge force instantly broke the bones of this person's hand. This time, not to mention the switchblade, he couldn't pick up anything else. But even if his wrist was broken, this person just trembled and opened his mouth wide, but he didn't make a scream. Looking at this scene, Jiang Hai felt a little creepy. But at this time, it was not the time to care about these things. He turned around and gave the tough guy under his foot a kick. The tough guy slid back with the help of the ice and blocked the way of a person. He then stuck to the person who was stabbing at him with a switchblade. It could be seen that this guy really wanted to fight to the death with Jiang Hai. Generally speaking, if one didn't want to die in a street scuffle, it was more of a scaring effect than a weapon. Even if there was an accidental cut, it would only be a bloody wound on the body. It was an external injury. Unless there was excessive blood loss, it was easy to treat. However, this guy really wanted to kill Jiang Hai because his action was to stab. As long as this knife pierced into the body, whether it hurt the heart, liver, spleen, lungs, or kidney, it would be fatal. Even if it only cut the intestines, it would still be fatal. It could be seen that this person didn't think too much at this time. Since they were playing around and trying to kill, Jiang Hai wouldn't be polite. Well, in fact, Jiang Hai was the one who dug out the eyeballs first. But humans always liked to blame others. Jiang Hai was also a human, so naturally, he was also like this. Looking at the dagger coming at him, Jiang Hai's body dodged. At the same time, his right hand stretched out like lightning and grabbed the person's wrist. Then, he used brute force. The huge force directly twisted the man's arm like a fried dough twist. Jiang Hai used force and directly sent the dagger back into the man's body. The moment the switchblade entered the man's flesh, the man's eyes instantly widened. He looked at Jiang Hai with a face of disbelief. Then, he used his other hand to cover his wound. His whole body trembled as he knelt down, but he still didn't scream. Seeing the man fall, Jiang Hai glanced at the blood on his hand. Originally, he thought that the man would be very scared and even run away. But his consciousness didn't feel this way. Instead, he calmly shook the blood on his hand. Although this was the first time he fought so fiercely, he didn't seem to be disgusted by it. It seemed like he didn't feel anything when he killed someone because of this. This made Jiang Hai's brows wrinkle. This kind of feeling made his liver tremble. His future path was to become a homicidal maniac. If this was the case, then it was really not good. But fortunately, he knew that even if he had such thoughts, it wasn't the time to think about it now. After all, he was still in the middle of a battle. On the nearby wall, Jiang Hai wiped the blood on his hand. Then, he looked at the last person who was still standing. He was also the last person holding a weapon. At this time, the sky was gradually getting dark, but his vision was still not affected. This person saw that his 12 companions were all lying down in a flash. He was also trembling in fear. The knife in his hand clearly couldn't provide him any sense of security. His whole body was trembling like a sieve. His eyes were full of fear. He clearly didn't exercise much, but the sweat on his forehead had already gathered into a stream. His face, which was already very dirty, was now even dirtier. "You're the only one left. Why aren't you coming up?" Raising his head, Jiang Hai looked at him casually and asked faintly. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the man looked around in horror. In fact, if there was space now, he would have run away. But unfortunately, at this time, the door here was tightly shut, and the wall behind him was also sealed. He really didn't know what to do. He didn't want to be beaten, but now it seemed that it was impossible not to be beaten. "Catch him, catch him, catch him, catch him." Just when he was extremely frightened, a sudden ear-piercing alarm rang from afar. Then, under the lead of an F-650, 2 police cars quickly arrived in front of the alley. As the 3 cars stopped, 4 police officers in Clive jumped out of the cars and ran into the small alley. Seeing the police arrive, the person here didn't say anything. He directly threw the knife in his hand far away, then habitually squatted down with his hands on his head. Seeing his shameless behavior, Jiang Hai couldn't help but raise his eyebrows. How proactive. The person inside, squat down and put your hands on your head. But soon, Jiang Hai knew that it was not a good thing to not take the initiative at this time, because the 4 police officers had also walked into the small alley at this time. When they saw the people on the ground with their faces full of blood, broken arms, and confused, they had already pulled out their guns and shouted at Jiang Hai, who was still standing in the small alley with a righteous face. Is there a mistake? I'm the victim. Hearing the words of these police officers, Jiang Hai said to them with some dissatisfaction. I'll say it again, put your hands on your head, squat down, now, right now. However, the police officers obviously didn't give Jiang Hai a chance to explain and directly said loudly. Looking at the black muzzles in front of him, Jiang Hai's heart flashed with a trace of dissatisfaction. It was the first time that someone pointed a gun at him directly, but he knew that this was not the time to test whether his body could withstand a bullet, so he still held his head and squatted down. After Jiang Hai also squatted down, 3 of the 4 police officers quickly ran over. One of them pointed a gun at the guy who confronted Jiang Hai just now, one pointed a gun at Jiang Hai, and the other one checked the situation of the people lying on the ground. The last police officer who didn't come over was contacting the ambulance while looking at SH-20 Clive at the same time. However, SH-20 Clive was a teacher after all, and she knew the law. At this time, she didn't panic, but after the man contacted the ambulance and reinforcements, she explained her and Jiang Hai's situation. After learning that Jiang Hai was indeed the victim, the police came over and said a few words to the police officer who pointed a gun at Jiang Hai, then the police officer put away the gun in his hand. After putting away the gun, the police officer helped Jiang Hai up and said with a serious face, Sir, I'm sorry, this is our duty. Please come back to the police station with us later, we need to record your statement. Chapter 133. Sorry, I'm late. Lawyer Moses went to Miami today. He's on his way back now, so he asked me to handle this case first. As the office door opened, Penelope Daller, who had met Jiang Hai once, walked in from outside. For Moses Adams, although Jiang Hai did not have any company acquisition proposals, nor did he have any international lawsuits to fight, such a rich person was still his high-quality customer. Logically speaking, as long as Jiang Hai needed it, he would immediately appear in front of Jiang Hai. Unfortunately, he wanted to appear in front of Jiang Hai immediately, but the flight did not allow it. Before Jiang Hai went to the police station, he called Moses Adams. After learning that he was in Miami, Jiang Hai wanted to change lawyers, but Moses said that he would come back immediately. Sometimes, Jiang Hai cared too much about his reputation, so he did not say anything and was directly taken into the office by the police. Fortunately, when the police learned of Jiang Hai's identity and determined that Jiang Hai was someone they couldn't afford to offend, their attitude towards Jiang Hai was still very good. They didn't need to sit outside to record the statement, so they specifically left an empty office for Jiang Hai. There was also hot coffee to drink. Although the coffee was instant, in this cold weather, having a cup of hot coffee could make people feel a little better. After asking about what happened today, the police went out to deal with it. As for Jiang Hai and SH-20 Clive, they temporarily stayed there. The 2 of them needed to be completely sure that this matter had nothing to do with Jiang Hai before they could leave. The 2 of them were bored, so they just sat there and watched the NBA on the TV in the office. Fortunately, although SH-20 Clive was not a fan, he still had some understanding of this thing. The 2 of them talked and laughed, and they had a good time. Meanwhile, at Jiang Hai's home, Jiang Hai had already asked Mrs. Philemon to go to his house to prepare dinner. After learning that Sh20 Clive's father was a French chef, he did not need to show off. He just needed to make these things taste the same. No matter how gorgeous they were, they could not be more gorgeous than French food, right? When Penelope came in, Jiang Hai and Sh20 Clive were talking about the Celtics' hopes for this year's playoffs. When she came in, the two of them were really shocked, but after greeting them, Penelope got to the point. It's nothing. This is not a big case. Maybe I was too harsh. When he heard Penelope's words, Jiang Hai smiled and touched the tip of his nose. To be honest, Jiang Hai also felt a little awkward when he saw Penelope. After all, she was not an ordinary lawyer. Even if she did not have a good relationship with her father was still Jiang Hai's subordinate. Therefore, when he saw this familiar face, it was difficult for him to order her around like he did Moses Adams. It's good that you're fine. I'll go and understand the situation first. Because she had come in a hurry, she had only received the facts that Moses Adams had told her on the way there. She was not very clear about the specific situation, so she had to go and understand it now. Jiang Hai did not care about this. He gestured for Penelope to go ahead, and then Penelope left. Jiang Hai and Sh20 Clive continued to sit there and watch TV. When the night's game was about to end, the policeman who had brought them in came in with Penelope. However, Penelope's eyes were a little red, which made Jiang Hai a little puzzled. Mr. Jiang Hai, we have understood your situation. You can leave now. Looking at Jiang Hai, the policeman first came up and shook his hand. Then he smiled kindly and said to Jiang Hai. This incident was actually very easy to pinpoint. After the police reinforcements arrived, the place was searched and everyone was arrested. Those who should be sent to the hospital were sent to the hospital. Those who were lightly injured, and those women, were all arrested and sent to the police station. In fact, this incident was not difficult to understand as long as it was investigated. Jiang Hai did not know these people before this. He had come out to play today. Sh20 Clive's wallet was stolen, and there was also a surveillance camera. Jiang Hai chased the thief and was led to that place. Those people took out switchblades, which was also true. Jiang Hai, to put it bluntly, was just self-defense. At the same time, there was no disability or death. This was not excessive self-defense. So no matter what, it would not be Jiang Hai's responsibility. Even the police had nothing to say. Thank you, then we will go first. Hearing that he could leave, Jiang Hai also smiled and shook hands with the policeman. Although it was very warm in the police station, to be honest, ordinary people were not willing to come here for nothing. Now that he heard that he could leave, Jiang Hai did not hesitate and was ready to leave directly. As for the unfinished football game, it was not important. As for Sh20 Clive, her thoughts were the same as Jiang Hai's. Who would be willing to come to the police station for nothing? Phew, today was a day of fun, betting, arresting people, and in the end, I ended up in the police station. It's a bit unlucky. Hee, but fortunately, it settled satisfactorily. Dinner is ready at my manor. Miss Clive, let's go. By the way, Miss Dale, come with us. Thank you for coming over so late, I'll treat you to dinner. After saying goodbye to the police, Jiang Hai and others walked out of the police station. Jiang Hai took a long breath. This is the free air. Cough, I was originally free. However, staying in the police station, it really felt that the air there was about to solidify, which was very uncomfortable. That, sir. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Penelope, who was still hesitating, couldn't help but slow down her pace. As if she had made up her mind, she raised her head and said to Jiang Hai. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai, who was still thinking about steak and lobster, couldn't help but be stunned for a moment. Then he turned his head curiously and looked at her. Is she going to refuse my invitation? Sir, can you please not sue those people? Seeing Jiang Hai's doubtful eyes, Penelope seemed to have made up her mind. She looked into Jiang Hai's eyes and said word by word. What do you mean? As a lawyer, the last thing they can't have is their own heart. They exist to serve their clients. Of course, sometimes, they need to give better advice to some people, but sometimes, especially when facing people like Jiang Hai, who is not short of money at all, the most important goal is to vent his anger for him or fight for his interests. Just like Moses Adams, no matter what the town hall or the town's police chief was like, he didn't give in. He didn't relent in the slightest. He only gave Jiang Hai the things he collected when Jiang Hai was a little shaken. As for what to do, it was still up to Jiang Hai to decide. He always knew who was the boss and who was the employee. For a good lawyer, things like pity didn't exist from the beginning. Since he was standing in front of Jiang Hai, as his lawyer, he had to do everything according to Jiang Hai's instructions. This was a good lawyer, not a person with a strong sense of morality who went against his own lawyer for others. You could call them cold-blooded or shameless, but only such lawyers were truly good lawyers. Although it was wrong to look at it from the perspective of human nature and morality, did this world talk about these things? So Penelope's words made Jiang Hai a little unhappy. Originally, because she was an acquaintance, his mood changed a little. He frowned and looked at her as he asked. They. Sigh, sir, they are actually a group of pitiful people. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, although she felt a little guilty about Jiang Hai's questioning, Penelope Daly still braced herself and said. These children are actually deaf and mute. After hesitating for a moment, Penelope whispered to Jiang Hai. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai, who was originally very unhappy, was stunned for a moment. Originally, he was still thinking, why are these guys so unyielding? It turned out that this was the reason why no one screamed when they were beaten up like that. Hearing Penelope's words, Jiang Hai's heart stirred, but it was quickly extinguished. Yes, some congenital defects were indeed pitiful, but this could not be a reason for them to commit crimes. What's more, these people wanted to kill him, which was absolutely not allowed. If a person with a defect worked hard, he would be praised all over the world. But if they only took advantage of this to commit crimes, no matter what others thought, at least Jiang Hai absolutely disapproved of it in his heart. A pitiful person must have a hateful side. At the very least, before fully understanding the course of events, one should not jump to conclusions. Not to mention, in such an incident, Jiang Hai appeared as a victim. This can't be a reason for them to commit crimes. Jiang Hai had always been like this. So after listening to Penelope's words, Jiang Hai said stiffly. After hearing Jiang Hai's words, Penelope's face became a little ugly. As for Sh20 Clive, if she were a bystander, she might pity these people, but she was the one who was robbed. And she just saw with her own eyes that the switchblades were used as evidence. Those things were not toys, and they would indeed die if they were stabbed. She thought that she was not a saint who would take other people's lives as a product of pity. She couldn't, and Jiang Hai couldn't. This was a matter of principle and couldn't be changed. Chapter 134. Are you really going to sue them? Sitting in the passenger seat of the pickup truck, Shendi Clive hesitated and said to Jiang Hai. Hearing her words, although she didn't say it clearly, Jiang Hai also knew what she was talking about. After Penelope told him about the situation of those people, Jiang Hai was indeed a little angry at the time, but now that he thought about it, he was really helpless. If he didn't sue them, he would be angry, but if he did sue them, they wouldn't be able to pay for it. At most, they would be locked up, which would not benefit him. The most important thing was that if he really sued them, it would give others the illusion that he was bullying these people. This was something that Jiang Hai didn't want to do. I don't know, let's not think about it for the time being. These people seem to have committed more than 1 or 2 crimes. They should have done this kind of thing many times. Maybe after the police interrogate them, the police won't let them go even if I don't sue them. Let's not think about it for now. Let's go eat first, I'm starving to death. After being silent for a long time, Jiang Hai decided to put aside his hesitation for the time being. He had to deal with tonight's dinner first. Good idea. Hearing that Jiang Hai hadn't made up his mind, Clive also knew that it was meaningless to say anything at this time. Not to mention Jiang Hai, if she let these people go, she would actually be a little unhappy in her heart. Since she couldn't make this decision, she would wait until later. Then, the conversation between the two of them returned to how it was before this incident had happened. Jiang Hai's F-650 quickly drove out of the downtown area of Boston and rushed in the direction of Winthrop. Because it was already past 7:00 in the evening, there might be some traffic on the road in the city center, but the highway in this city had passed their peak hour. Jiang Hai could drive here at the maximum speed on the road that had been cleared. It would have taken more than an hour to get there, but he rushed back to his manor before 8:00. The gate of the manor was rebuilt after Jiang Hai took over the manor. Although it looked very ordinary, it actually had an automatic authentication system. When Jiang Hai came in, he only needed to scan his face. Of course, there was also a triple lock and password switch. In Jiang Hai's house, except for the workers' room, the rooms in his villa were basically double-locked. Usually, they could be opened with a password. If there was no password, they had to open with a key. Of course, the door could also be locked from the inside, but it had to be inside the room. As the gate slowly opened, Jiang Hai's car also slowly drove into the manor. When his car stopped in front of his villa, the gate of his villa was also opened. Xiao Bai and Xiao Huang quickly ran out of the villa. On top of Xiao Bai's head was the snow squirrel that Jiang Hai had brought back from the forest, Daya. The two dogs and one squirrel quickly ran in front of Jiang Hai's car and roared at Jiang Hai's car. This gave Clive, who was about to get out of the car, a fright. After all, anyone who saw these two huge beasts would not let down their guard easily. His hand was already on the door handle, but when he saw the two dogs, he could not open the door. Go, go, go. Go and play somewhere else. Don't worry, they won't bite. They are welcoming us. Jiang Hai turned around and saw the fear in Clive's heart. He immediately got out of the car and kicked Xiao Huang and Xiao Bai's buttocks to chase them away. At the same time, he explained to Clive. Clive was stunned when she heard Jiang Hai's words. Then, she saw that the two dogs really ran to the side after being kicked away by Jiang Hai. They stopped barking and did not seem to be aggressive. Only then did she breathe a sigh of relief. She knew that a manor owner like Jiang Hai would raise dogs, and he would raise quite a few of them. After all, herding cows required the help of cattle dogs. Although her family had never raised a dog before, she was already mentally prepared. After getting out of the car, Clive was still looking at the two dogs. To be honest, ever since the two dogs followed Jiang Hai, they ate well and lived well. Most importantly, Jiang Hai had used his blood to transform them. Not only did their intelligence increase, but their size also increased. The Caucasian Mastiff and the Green Wolf Mastiff, which were originally large dogs, seemed to have grown bigger after being nourished for a few months. The Green Wolf Mastiff, in particular, looked more and more like a wolf, but it was bigger than a wolf. Even if it was compared to the largest North American gray wolf on Earth, it was still bigger than the North American gray wolf. Its claws and fangs could not be seen normally, but when it stood up, it was indeed a little scary. As for the Caucasian Xiao Bai, it was more than half a size bigger than the Green Wolf Mastiff. Although it was not as fierce, at least in terms of weight and size, the current Xiao Bai was more intimidating than Xiao Huang. Their fur was glossy and soft, and there was no strange smell on their bodies. If someone who knew dogs was here, they would realize that these two dogs were really good dogs. Even their front teeth had changed a lot over the past few days. Not only had they grown bigger, but their fur had also become much softer. Jiang Hai was a little worried. It was still a squirrel, but if it continued to grow, it would become a mink. Speaking of which, it was the smartest of the three little guys. As soon as it saw 25 get out of the car, it rolled its eyes and jumped down from Xiao Bai's head. Then it quickly climbed up 25's foot and rubbed against her palm. Wow, little cutie, what's its name? Sure enough, women's resistance to cute things wasn't high. Under the attack of the front teeth, 25 said with a face full of surprise. It's called front teeth. Okay, let's go in first. Seeing that 25's eyes lit up when she saw the front teeth, Jiang Hai couldn't help but smile and shake his head. This guy's IQ developed really quickly. He was already trying to please the people around him. Okay. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Xiao Bai and Xiao Huang stood up first and led the two into the villa. As soon as they entered the villa, a hot wind blew in their faces. Jiang Hai and Sandy couldn't help but take a deep breath. Although it was very warm in the car, it was because of the air conditioner. When the air conditioner was turned on, there was no way to open the windows. Fortunately, Jiang Hai didn't smoke, so the air in the car was passable, but it was definitely not good. When they got out of the car, although the air was good, it was too cold. This time, when they entered the house, the air was good and warm. Jiang Hai was a northerner. Northerners were actually more afraid of the cold than southerners because there was no heating in the south. In winter, the southerners were still fine because the temperature was more than 10 degrees, but the people in the Central Plains and Sichuan were much worse. The temperature outside was 2 or 3 degrees, and the temperature inside the house was also 2 or 3 degrees. It was really unbearable. Although Boston belonged to the northern region in terms of latitude and longitude, because it was close to the Atlantic Ocean, it was considered an oceanic climate. Therefore, the temperature here in winter wasn't particularly cold. Ordinary people, in order to save some air, would turn on the heater in winter and let the temperature reach about 10 degrees to get through the winter. This was also the reason why in many American movies, the actors had to wear sweaters and woolen clothes in the house. Of course, there were also environmental protection organizations that said that this was to save energy and reduce emissions, but Jiang Hai didn't know the specifics. He only knew that he was very afraid of the cold, so in this winter, his villa was turned on 24 hours a day, and the temperature was very high, constant at 24 degrees. As for the air conditioner, it wouldn't work if it was -7 degrees, so he had to rely on it. Then he would freeze to death. Wow, your house is really warm. As soon as they entered Jiang Hai's villa, Sh25 whispered. At the same time, his eyes were also looking at the villa in front of him. Jiang Hai's decoration was very good in the eyes of ordinary people. At least, the things he could buy were more expensive in the market. Although there weren't any treasures, when he walked in, he would still be amazed. Of course, there was no way to compare with those real rich people. Moreover, Jiang Hai wasn't very willing to spend money on antiques. It was true that he had 300 million yuan, but it was all spent on this manor. Before the manor had enough output, he didn't need to consider these things. Give me your coat, I'll hang it up for you. Change your shoes here. While Sh25 was looking at Jiang Hai's villa, Jiang Hai had already taken off his coat and walked over with a pair of slippers that no one had ever seen before. There's no other way, I don't have a woman here, so I only have men's slippers. Seeing Xanthi strangely looking at the pair of gray slippers in his hand, Jiang Hai shrugged and said to her. Hee, it's okay. Looking at Jiang Hai's appearance, Sh25 also laughed, then took off his coat and handed it to Jiang Hai, then changed into the slippers. At this time, a figure came out from the kitchen in the distance. Hey, boss, you're finally back. If you didn't come back, the steak would have been cold. Huh, little girl from the Clive family, you're in luck today. This is the beef that our boss treasured, and the lobster that Ai Dehua just caught today. As soon as the figure saw Jiang Hai, his mouth began to chatter. Hearing this voice, Jiang Hai didn't need to look at his face to know that it was Philemon. In Jiang Hai's manner, Jiang Hai didn't know who was the best cook, but he had recently gotten used to eating Mrs. Philemon's food. Therefore, before Jiang Hai left today, he also asked Mrs. Philemon to prepare dinner for him. It seemed that Mrs. Philemon was forced to come by his wife, but it also showed that Mrs. Philemon valued this meal very much. Chapter 135. This is steak. Take your time, there's plenty more. When Jiang Hai and Sh-20 Clive arrived at the dining room, they imagined that there would be red wine, candles, whips, and so on. Cough, it seemed like there was something strange mixed in. But we can ignore it for the time being, because there was no such thing. Everything was still the same as before, but there was a new white tablecloth on the table. The more Jiang Hai looked at it, the more he felt that it was similar to a curtain in the villa. But before he could confirm it, Philip and Mrs. Philip had already served dinner. Eating in Jiang Hai's home was destined to be a place that wasn't particular about food. There weren't any particular people here, whether it was cowboys or fishermen, they all came and went roughly, so the things they cooked were also rough. There were a total of 4 large plates and a pot. Inside the pot was a cheddar soup, the most famous soup in Boston. Among the 4 large plates, there was a huge lobster on one of them. It seemed that this was Robin's harvest today. Jiang Hai looked at the lobster. It was about 16 or 17 pounds. Although it was not the king of lobsters, it was definitely one of the biggest lobsters. In addition to this huge lobster, there was also a plate of grilled steak. In other Western restaurants, steak was eaten in pieces, but in Jiang Hai's restaurant, it was eaten in plates. On the other 2 plates, there was a pile of salad made of vegetables and fruits, and on the other, there was a freshly baked bread. Although the arrangement was not particular, it made people feel that it was very realistic. Perhaps, for some people, doing this is disrespectful to them, but Jiang Hai doesn't care. Because there was no need for him to make friends with such people. To put it bluntly, he was still a nouveau riche. He didn't care about what others thought of him. He only cared about whether he was comfortable or not, that was all. Uncle Turner, Aunt Turner, you should also join us. Xanthe Clive stood up and said politely to the 2 of them when she saw the Philmonts carrying out the 5 large plates. No need. Don't you see what time it is now? We've already finished eating. You guys take your time. Hearing her words, Mrs. Philemon laughed. In fact, they were all from the same small town, so they were very clear about Clive's family situation. Generally speaking, this family was not bad. His father used to be a chef. His culinary skills were not bad, and his temper was not bad. Her mother was an ordinary housewife. After Sh-20 Clive graduated from university, she returned to the town's primary school to be a teacher. In fact, she could have found a better job, but she still returned to her hometown, Winthrop. Therefore, the people in the small town had a good impression of this family because of their work at Sh-20 Clive. Seeing that their boss had brought this girl back, they felt that there might be something going on between the 2 of them. If Jiang Hai knew what they were thinking, he would probably be stunned for a moment, because it seemed that, probably, he had no intention of pursuing Xanthe Clive. Well, it didn't count when he was sleeping, at least he didn't have such intentions when he was conscious. Okay then, be careful when you go back. Seeing that the Philemons decided not to stay and be a third wheel, Cindy Clive smiled and sent the 2 of them back. This made Jiang Hai, who originally wanted to eat immediately after coming back, feel too embarrassed to use his knife and fork. Instead, he followed Cindy Clive and sent the 2 of them out of the house before returning to the dining room. Let's start eating now. Looking at the food on the table, Jiang Hai rubbed his mouth, licked his lips subconsciously, and said seriously. Seeing his appearance, Xanthe Clive couldn't help but chuckle. She felt more and more that Jiang Hai was very interesting. Then she took the initiative to sit opposite Jiang Hai, picked up a piece of steak, and put it on Jiang Hai's plate. Jiang Hai, who originally wanted to directly eat, couldn't help but stare blankly. Then he picked the largest piece of steak and put it on Xanthe Clive's plate. Seeing Jiang Hai's choice, Xanthe Clive couldn't help but laugh and roll her eyes. What are you looking at? Eat. Unfortunately, this flirtatious supercilious look was like playing the lute to a cow in front of Jiang Hai. When Jiang Hai saw that she was only looking at him without eating, he said directly to her. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Xanthi Clive also smiled. She picked up her knife and fork and cut a piece of steak that looked a little cold. In fact, as a woman, a beautiful woman, she didn't eat much. To be honest, the three most important things about food were its color, aroma, and taste. First of all, there was no need to consider the color of the steak made by Mrs. Phillip. Because Jiang Hai only ate fully cooked steak, this piece of steak was almost like a piece of charred meat. There was no beauty in it at all. Second, the aroma. Because it was a little cold, it didn't smell very fragrant. Last but not least, the taste. Although SH20 Clive hadn't tasted it, she felt that if the color and aroma of the steak weren't the best, the taste wouldn't be too good either. Although Jiang Hai was a rich man and had 20,000 cows, SH20 Clive didn't raise any cows at home. However, she knew very well that it wasn't easy for a cow to raise premium grade A beef. However, raising a cow by itself required a lot of attention to detail and was very troublesome. After all, SH20 Clive had worked in a Western restaurant before. Therefore, she had more or less attended ranchers who specialized in raising premium grade A beef. Basically, to raise such a cow, the number of cowboys and not the size of the pasture was determined. A cowboy who worked more than 10 hours a day could at most raise 3 such cows. That way, the meat of the cow would have a perfect marbling pattern. Otherwise, why would a pound of usable beef be sold for $3, while this cow was sold for $300? That was why it was expensive. However, Jiang Hai obviously wasn't like that. Therefore, she guessed that Jiang Hai's so-called marbling pattern cow was either a bluff from Luo Binsi and the others, or he himself didn't know much about it. Regarding this, she wasn't very familiar with Jiang Hai yet, so it wasn't easy for her to say. But in any case, Jiang Hai's hospitality to her was a kind gesture. Moreover, he also said that the beef had a marbled pattern, so it was estimated that there was a premium grade. This kind of beef was not cheap. At least, as a teacher in a small town, even if she wanted to eat it every day, she still couldn't afford it, so she was prepared to try it. When her fork touched Jiang Hai's steak, the moment the knife gently cut it open, she couldn't help but feel surprised. Because the feeling of the steak being cut open was very strange. This feeling was really similar to the feeling she had when she secretly ate her father's steak in that French restaurant. It was similar to the feeling she had when she secretly ate her father's steak. There was no trace of tendon in the meat. It was completely the firmness of the beef itself. When the knife cut open the muscle fibers on both sides, the feeling was really difficult to describe in words. Was it a waste of strength? No, but was it easy to cut? It didn't seem to be. Just as she was feeling a little strange, the knife had already cut off the small piece of beef. She subconsciously put it into her mouth with a fork. The moment the slightly burnt piece of beef entered her mouth, the thick taste of beef juice spread in her mouth. As she gently bit down with her teeth, the elastic feeling of the muscle fibers being bitten off instantly, the thick beef juice hidden in the piece of meat, and the oily feeling of the marble flowers piled up by the fat instantly exploded at this moment. Her jaw moved almost uncontrollably, constantly chewing that piece of beef in her mouth. Excellent, absolutely excellent grade A beef. While her mouth was constantly tasting this delicious food, her brain was also constantly telling her that this thing was real, the taste of this thing was real. Jiang Hai did not lie to her, or it could be said that he was not deceived. He really did have a special grade A beef cow. At this time, she finally understood why Jiang Hai would be so arrogant as to make a bet with the people from the Cartwright Company. Really, in front of a special grade A beef cow, unless it was the top Japanese beef cow, all other beef cows would only have the fate of being blown to pieces. The original hesitation about the color, fragrance, and taste had been thrown to the back of her mind at this time. When she finally reacted, the large piece of steak in front of her had already entered her stomach. At this moment, when she looked at the plate of burnt beef again, she felt that it was no longer a plate of beef, but a plate of dollars. She subconsciously picked up the fork, put another piece on her plate, and then began to eat. You'll get tired of eating beef all the time. Come, have some lobster. If you like it, you can take some back later. Just when she was trying her best to eat the second piece of steak in front of her, a huge lobster claw stretched in front of her, and then Jiang Hai's voice came from the opposite side. SH-20 Clive looked up and saw Jiang Hai gnawing on a claw. In fact, whether it was eating crabs or lobsters, they all had their own tools, but Jiang Hai didn't have the patience and leisure to do so. He ate these things violently. Anyway, he had plenty of strength. As for eating elegantly, it had nothing to do with him. She looked up and smiled at Jiang Hai a little embarrassedly, then took the claw from him. Only now did she remember that she looked a little ugly when she was eating the steak. After all, she was a girl, so she couldn't help but feel a little embarrassed. She lowered her head and bit a piece of the claw that Jiang Hai handed to her. Fortunately, Jiang Hai had already pried the claw open. You don't have to take it away. Your steak is really delicious. No wonder you have the confidence to make a bet with Cartwright Company. You know, as long as 1% of the meat produced by your cattle is this grade of beef, you won't have to worry about the sales of your beef cattle. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, SH-20 Clive temporarily got rid of the awkwardness and said seriously to Jiang Hai. 1%? Huh, it's okay. You can eat as much of this beef as you want. If you can't finish it, you can take it all away. I have a lot of fresh beef of this grade here. No one eats the finished ones, so I basically fed it to the dogs. But obviously, they prefer to eat it raw. Shrugging his shoulders, although his words were somewhat hurtful, Jiang Hai was indeed telling the truth. Chapter 137. Let's do it here, good night. The F-650 roared as it stopped in front of a house in Winthrop Town. SH-20 Clive jumped out of the car. Naturally, this time, Jiang Hai also jumped out of the car. Looking at the beautiful girl carrying 2 bags of beef, Jiang Hai couldn't help but hesitate. But Sandy was much more straightforward. Oh, okay, if you want to eat beef or fish, you can come to my place, I have enough. Hearing Sandy's words, Jiang Hai chuckled and said to her. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Sandy smiled even more happily. She now couldn't understand Jiang Hai, this big boy. Speaking of which, Jiang Hai's age should be about the same as hers, but his shy personality didn't seem like a 27-year-old adult. If SH-20 Clive didn't see his appearance, she would even think that he was just a 17-year-old young man. Sometimes, his thoughts and actions didn't seem like an adult's actions. Jiang Hai could swear that he was indeed an adult, but in terms of mentality, he was indeed a little immature. But there was no other way. In fact, in China, nearly 70% of people as old as Jiang Hai didn't match their age. They were a lot younger. They didn't know how to take care of others when they went out, and they had some unrealistic dreams. They didn't calculate how much money they spent, and they did things based more on hot-bloodedness, etc. Those who had such characteristics could be said to be people who hadn't grown up. Originally, Jiang Hai should have had an opportunity to become stronger, and that was his parents' death. At that time, if he was alone, maybe he would have become more mature, but the appearance of his wife made him fall into a fantasy. But now, although the fantasy was shattered, it wasn't easy for his character to become more mature. If he wanted to become more mature, he had to take a blow. But in the current situation, what blow could he take? He didn't play with investment and financial management, he only played with business. He didn't have any rich friends. Were you sure he would be afraid of fighting and kidnapping? A person like him who couldn't even jump badges and stayed at home all day long, how could he take a blow? But this kind of character was a good character for others. For example, SH-20 Clive. For her, it was good to make friends with such a person. First of all, Jiang Hai wouldn't cheat her, right? As for the future, she would think about it. At least for now, she didn't think that she would have any development with Jiang Hai. After all, from the first time they met until now, they had only met 4 times. Even if the United States was a more open country, it wouldn't be so fast. Well, then I'll go first. Hearing Jiang Hai's promise, SH-20 Clive chuckled, then waved to Jiang Hai, turned around, and walked into the villa behind her. But as soon as she entered the door, she found that in the living room, 3 pairs of eyes were looking at her. Feeling such gazes, SH-20 Clive waved her hand a little awkwardly. You guys haven't slept yet. Looking at the 3 people in front of her, SH-20 Clive broke the silence first. I'll take the things to the kitchen first, you guys talk first. Hearing his daughter's words, SH-20 Clive's father, old Clive, stood up first. It wasn't appropriate for him to say this kind of thing. Although his wife wasn't Sandy's biological mother, the mother and daughter got along well over the years, so it was better for them to ask about this matter. Well, okay. After handing the bag inside to her father, SH-20 Clive hung the coat on the hanger by the door. Compared with Jiang Hai's home, which was 24 degrees all year round, Sandy's home was much colder, only 12 or 13 degrees. After taking off the coat, it was a little cold, but fortunately, she was used to it. Knowing that this matter couldn't be avoided, she took the initiative to go to the sofa in the guest room, picked up the TV, and changed the channel. Sister, did you go out with that guy all day today? Oh, cake seller, did you go to the hotel? When SH-20 Clive sat down, her sister, Karma Cliff, who had met Jiang Hai once, asked excitedly. Hearing her words, Sandy couldn't help but roll her eyes. Are high school students nowadays so direct? How is it possible? I just took him around Boston. He has been here for so long, but he hasn't visited Boston yet. I'm a tour guide today, a tour guide. Rolling her eyes at her little sister, SH-20 Clive explained. Hey, how is it possible? How can there be a tour guide as beautiful as sister? Did he touch you? You came back so late, what did you do? Hearing SH-20 Clive's words, Karma Cliff obviously didn't believe it and kept asking. You are really gossipy, you are so imaginative, why don't you write novels? Looking at her sister with some amusement, SH-20 Clive said to her angrily. Hearing SH-20 Clive's words, Karma couldn't help but hesitate, was she wrong? But looking at her sister's appearance, such a beautiful woman, she doesn't believe that Jiang Hai won't be tempted. Well, Karma, don't bother your sister, Sandy, although I am not your biological mother, I have been teaching you as my own daughter over the years. Now you are an adult, and you are not young. You are 26 years old this year. If you really meet the right one, you should consider it. I think the young man just now is good. I heard from Karma that his economic conditions are also very good. Although our family doesn't want his money, this is basic. If you have feelings for him, you can try and give him some opportunities. Patting Karma's thigh, Xanthi's stepmother looked at Xanthi and said seriously. There was a good saying, if there was a stepmother, there would be a stepfather. In this world, there were many vicious stepmothers. However, Sandy's fate is good. Her stepmother is still very good to her, and she and Karma are 9 years apart. So when she was almost sensible, Karma was born. The age gap between the two is a lot, and the things needed at each age are different. This may also be the reason why there are no other contradictions in this family. Mom, you really think too much. I really only met him 4 times. If he hadn't donated $60,000 to our school to build the school building, I wouldn't have accompanied him to Boston. Looking at her mother with a dumbfounded expression, SH-20 Clive said clearly, but at the same time, Jiang Hai's figure kept appearing in her mind today. From the silly boy who got up in the morning, to the confident man in the afternoon, to the master who fought with more than a dozen people in order to retrieve his wallet at night, and the beef at night. It's really hard to say what she feels about Jiang Hai, but now she can be sure that she has some good feelings about him, but that is only limited to friends. But then again, she seems to have forgotten something, it seems to be beef. Yes, Beef. Ah. Just as she was recalling what happened today, a scream came from the kitchen in the distance. When the mother and daughters heard this scream, they immediately thought that something bad had happened and quickly ran to the kitchen. But when they arrived in the kitchen, they found that their father and husband were holding their big bald heads with both hands, looking at the beef in the plastic bag in front of them with horror. Yes, although Jiang Hai's words were a bit annoying. But as the daughter of a chef, Sandy couldn't watch this good meat fall into the dog's mouth, so in the end, she took the rest of the beef away. Little Yellow and Xiao Bai didn't say anything about this. Just like what Jiang Hai said, these two guys prefer to eat raw, not cooked, and it seems that they have become more and more wild recently. But for Jiang Hai, this beef that dogs don't like to eat is a supreme delicacy in the eyes of humans. Super A, top-grade frost snow beef, it's actually made like this. This is unforgivable. Looking at the leftover steaks in front of him, Sandy's father picked up a piece and said with a sad face, which made him feel even more distressed than cutting off a piece of his meat. It's not necessary, Dad, you're too evil. Isn't it just beef? Hearing her father's roar, Karma, who didn't know much about this, scratched her head strangely. Not long after she could remember, Sandy's father had stopped cooking in the Western restaurant, so even if she had tasted top-grade beef when she was young, she wouldn't remember. In her opinion, all beef was about the same. It's not that bad. How can you say it's not that bad? This state and this distribution of fat is clearly something that only top-grade frost beef can have. I still remember seeing this kind of beef in a Japanese restaurant a long time ago. At that time, I was also shocked. The distribution of fat on the meat was like a beautiful picture scroll. It was mesmerizing. Do you know how much this kind of beef can be sold for in New York? $400 a pound, but what are you making now? This is simply a crime, a reckless waste of God's gift. Hearing his daughter's words, Clive almost jumped up in anger. Grabbing the steak in his hand, he said with an intoxicated look. Hearing his words, his wife and Karma Cliff were both stunned. How could a piece of beef be so expensive? It's okay, this is just what we're eating tonight. There's another piece beside it that he gave me. It hasn't been cooked yet. Hearing her father's words, SH-20 Clive muttered in her heart, as I guessed, this is indeed a top-grade steak. It's just that Mrs. Turner ruined it. Thinking of this, she immediately told her father that she had brought a piece of raw steak. Chapter 138. Ignoring SH-20 Clive's father, Jiang Hai watched SH-20 Clive walk into their house before he drove back to his manor. Superior A-grade beef was actually not just superior A-grade beef. It was more of a noble attitude. Those who could afford to eat this kind of food were all rich people. It was more of a symbol of status than the price of the ingredients themselves. For example, even if this premium snowflake beef was sold for $400 a pound, would the people in the United States not be able to afford it? They definitely could not afford to eat it every day, but what about a month or a year? They would definitely be willing to pay for it. The problem was that this type of beef was priceless. It could not be bought on the market. The beef sold in the largest supermarket was only of the best quality. There wasn't even a special selection, let alone a special quality one. If the supermarkets did not have it, one could not expect to find it in the market. There was only one source of this type of beef. It was a premium Western restaurant. Normally, this type of beef would cost more than $300. $400 was less than 1 pound. However, if one went to a Western restaurant, the price would be terrifying. Moreover, one would not just order a plate of steak at a Western restaurant. The cheapest 3-course set meal with premium A snowflake beef as the main course would cost $998. If one person ate $998, 2 people would cost at least $2,000. Not many people would be willing to eat this kind of food. However, for Jiang Hai, this meat was just meat. Other people's cows were carefully raised and their marbled meat would not yield more than 5% of the meat. However, Jiang Hai's cows could yield 10% of the meat. This was what it meant to be a cow with 13 points. Although he had to bleed himself every time, Jiang Hai felt that it was worth it. The scales are almost full. I hope I won't need to bleed again in the next level. After returning home, Jiang Hai took a shower and looked at the python tattoo on his body in the mirror. At this time, the scales on the python's body were almost fully grown. After all, Jiang Hai did not bleed during the winter. 8 scales were growing every day, so the scales on his python were almost fully grown. Now, only a small part of the tail was left. He did not know what would happen after the evolution, but Jiang Hai was still looking forward to it. The next morning, Jiang Hai woke up and went out for a run. Then, he went out to sea with robins and the others. Naturally, Jiang Hai didn't recruit these sailors to feed the uncles. They needed to work. Jiang Hai's order for the sea bath seeds should be delivered in the middle of January, which is around the 15th or 16th. Before these seeds were released, Jiang Hai needed to catch most of the fish in the area where he wanted to raise fish and sell them. This was to give space for the fish raised later. After all, the fish here were too mixed. Some of them were valuable, and some were not. After fishing them up, it was not necessarily profitable. Secondly, if these fish were not caught, the seeds of the sea bath would become their food. The seeds of the sea bath were actually secondary. After all, they were not expensive. But if Jiang Hai's fry became their food, then Jiang Hai would cry. Of course, it was not to catch all the fish in this sea area. Jiang Hai was not going to catch any fish near the coastal coral reefs because the fish near the coral reefs had their own set of food chains. Jiang Hai did not need to worry about them. More importantly, many of these fish relied on the coral reefs to survive, such as some low-level bream, shrimps, crabs, and so on. It was precisely because of the existence of these prey that some predatory fish would not leave this area. Jiang Hai did not need to worry that these fish would affect Jiang Hai's fish farm. As for the fish in the sea outside, Jiang Hai did not plan to catch all of them. He only wanted to catch 80% of them. Even if he ate the rest, he would not be able to eat much. But even if it was 80%, it was still a small amount. According to Robin's measurements, the total number of fish in Jiang Hai's fishery might be worth tens of millions of dollars. Of course, if Jiang Hai didn't touch the corals now, it would be at least $4 million less. But there were $6 million worth of fish left. Even if it was 80%, it was still $8 million worth of fish. There were a lot of fish. Just like a few days ago, when Jiang Hai went out to sea, a large number of fish were found at the bottom of the sea in less than half an hour. What else was there to say? Let's start fishing. With a new helper, Philip didn't need to come and cause trouble. These old fishermen were much faster than Jiang Hai and Philip. In less than half an hour, they had already finished sorting the fish that weighed several tons. The only thing Jiang Hai needed to do as the boss was to count the kilograms of high-quality fish, ordinary fish, and things like shrimps and crabs. However, some of these shrimps and crabs would not be sold, because Jiang Hai liked to eat them. Perhaps some people would say that this was not good. They would have to be sold. Wasn't Jiang Hai in need of money now? Every penny should be split into 2 halves. However, the so-called lack of money was just that. At the very least, Jiang Hai would not mistreat himself in terms of living. Besides, he believed that his money would come back sooner or later. As long as he paid the first year's taxes, Jiang Hai believed that his cow would give him a satisfactory answer for the second year's taxes. Today, the fishing boat went out for a spin. In half a day, the 4 warehouses of the fishing boat were filled with fish. Jiang Hai was forced to go to the fisherman's place. The 4 warehouses of fish earned Jiang Hai $60,000. In the afternoon, he went to fish a few more nets. Before the market closed at night, Jiang Hai's 4 cabins were full again, and he sold them for another $65,000. His daily income was $125,000. After deducting the cost of diesel and lunch, Jiang Hai's net income was about $100,000. Of course, the fish were originally his, but he had to give them a bonus. After all, this was Jiang Hai's first time working with these sailors, so he gave them a generous bonus. He gave them a bonus of $10,000, which was equivalent to 10% of the net income. Divided equally among the 5 fishermen, each of them received $2,000. The fishermen were overjoyed. Not only were Eleanor Lucy and Andrew Christian so happy that their mouths were about to form a circle, but even Tommy Charles and Marlon Rupert were very happy. Although they were white, it was the first time they had seen a boss who gave out money so readily. At the same time, they had more confidence in Jiang Hai. When Jiang Hai's fishing boat returned to the port, the fishermen delivered some of the seafood that Jiang Hai deliberately left behind to Jiang Hai's home, and then dispersed. But just as these people left, while Jiang Hai was still dealing with these things, someone outside the door rang the doorbell. Jiang Hai went to take a look. It was none other than his chief lawyer, Moses Adams. "Mr. Jiang Hai, I brought the preliminary handling of last night's incident." Hearing Jiang Hai's voice, Moses Adams, who was standing outside the door, immediately said with a smile. He knew that these rich people had bad tempers. And it was unacceptable that their private lawyers were not there when they were in trouble. After all, they had to pay. So when Moses Adams learned that Jiang Hai was looking for him, he flew over overnight. After sleeping on the plane, he began to deal with and ask about the process of Jiang Hai's incident. Although it was a little thrilling, it was relatively clear. So today, he had already brought the preliminary handling opinions. Of course, whether to deal with it or not was up to Jiang Hai. After all, he was only a lawyer, not the client. He could not make any decisions for the client. "Come in." Although Jiang Hai was somewhat dissatisfied that this person was not there when he was in trouble yesterday, he still pressed the doorbell and let him in. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Moses Adams couldn't help but let out a sigh of relief. Then he drove into Jiang Hai's manor. After parking the car, he walked into Jiang Hai's villa with a file bag. But as soon as he entered the villa, he smelled a fishy smell. Just as he was about to speak, he saw Xiao Bai and Xiao Huang flash out from the side in an instant, looking at him with a wary face. As long as he dared to take a step forward, the eyes of the 2 big dogs instantly changed from wary to threatening. And looking at their eyes, Moses Adams was sure that if he dared to take a step forward, they would pounce on him. Looking at the 2 dogs that were bigger than wolves, Moses Adams subconsciously swallowed a mouthful of saliva. "Mr. Jiang Hai, I'm here." After thinking about it, Moses Adams wisely chose not to move, but shouted into the villa. Hearing his shout, after about a minute or so, Jiang Hai walked out of the warehouse in the distance with his clothes on. When he saw him, Jiang Hai's face showed a hint of surprise. "You're here. Hey, these 2 guys won't let outsiders in before they get the order. Xiao Bai, Xiao Huang, go back to your nest." Looking at Moses Adams, Jiang Hai chuckled and said to him, then motioned to Xiao Bai and Xiao Huang to leave. After hearing Jiang Hai's words, Moses Adams couldn't help but flash a bitter smile. How could he not know that this was Jiang Hai's way of putting him in his place? Just now, the door was opened by Jiang Hai, and now Jiang Hai said that he didn't know he was here. How is that possible? This was Jiang Hai expressing his dissatisfaction that he didn't come immediately after he called him yesterday. It's understandable. If it were me, I would probably be very dissatisfied too. "Boss, I don't want to explain too much, but I brought you a gift. Look." You're tuning into the Biyao's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.